Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. And despite approximately 40% of World War II battles taking place in an urban environment, it's a subject or form of warfare that seems to still be relatively unexplored. Major Jayson Geroux joins us to look at the city fighting in Aachen. I welcome him now. Good afternoon, Jayson. How are you today?
Good to go, Paul. Woody, and I tell you, I'm very excited to be here today. Very, very excited to be here.
Good. So, why is it that we generally seem to think of urban warfare as a kind of a modern phenomenon? We kind of think of it from Vietnam onwards, and Full Metal Jacket, and Iraq and Afghanistan. But as I said in the top of the show, there it was very much a World War II thing. Is it because there wasn't really developed doctrine back in World War II? Why do we think of it as a modern thing?
Well, the ironic thing is that people in cities have been around for centuries,
Yeah.
and urban warfare has actually been around for centuries as well. But I think what has happened since the Second World War is because of the rapid urbanization of the planet, where approximately 50 to 65, it depends on the resources you read, but 50 to 65% of the world's population is currently urbanized. And by the time the next generation of young children grow up and the resources say that anywhere from 75 to 85% of the world is going to be urbanized or living in an urban area. So I think even though it's a recent phenomenon, it's not really that recent. It's just more noticeable now because of the rapid urbanization of the world, especially in Africa and a lot of the other third world countries, really.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. But you've come armed with lots of stuff to screen to share. You've got some Google mapping work going on, so we'll get that fired up. And folks, what we're going to do today is we're going to do the questions at the end of the show today, because Jayson has kind of built in a questions bit, but I'll save the good ones there. But I promise you there'll be lots of detail in this. So I think your questions probably will end up being kind of answered as we go along. But I'm going to hand over to our guest to kind of to kick us off. So here we go: the Battle of Aachen from an urban point of view.
Thank you, Woody. And you can see my screen. Good to go, yeah?
Yep, we're good to go.
Outstanding. All right. So having been in the Canadian Armed Forces now for 29 years, I always follow the Canadian Armed Forces format. So in this case, teacher points. So we'll start off with an introduction. Woody, I've often get asked, how did I become interested in urban operations and urban warfare? Or I've even had a couple people on social media challenge me. They're like, "You're a Canadian. What can you possibly know about urban warfare?" As if my nationality had something to do with my knowledge or my lack of knowledge on the subject or something. I don't know. So this is my resume. When I was a company second in command with 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, 3 RCR, we had just come back from our operational tour to Bosnia-Herzegovina and the former Yugoslavia, and our commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Thompson, now retired Major General Dennis Thompson, very intelligent gentleman. He launched the entire battalion on an urban operations training program. It was all about clearing rooms and walking down hallways and running across streets and stuff. And then when I got posted to the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, which is an Army Reserve unit here in Canada, I had a company commander, Lawrence Hatfield, who was very interested in urban operations training. And I said, "Well, Lawrence, what a coincidence. I just finished a year-long urban operations training package with the RCR." So we did 3 years of urban operations training. I was the operations officer of the unit. And then a few years later, I was with 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, 2 RCR, and I was stationed in the city of Kabul in Afghanistan. And on the 15th of April, we had about 50 to 60 insurgents attack all the NATO camps inside Kabul. And there I was throughout the afternoon. The bullets and the rocket propelled grenades and the helicopter gunships are flying over my head. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this is great. All the training I did with 3 RCR and the Argylls, it was all the individual skills, how to clear rooms, the hands and feet skills, as we call it. Here I am as a major. What the heck am I supposed to be doing as a major when it comes to urban operations? I had no idea, no clue. And I thought, if I ever get out of this alive, I think I'll start professionally developing myself on the planning, the tactics, and the sustainment at the company, battalion, brigade level, because that's what I need to know now. And so, very fortunately, got posted to Tactics School, which is the Center of Excellence for Combined Arms Training for the Canadian Armed Forces. And while I was the course officer for several courses or syndicate directing staff, instructing on several courses, I was able to put together a number of urban operations training packages for the Army Tactical Operations course, the Infantry Dismounted Company Commanders course, and the Combat Team Commanders course. I did that for 6 years for several courses, and these packages were anywhere from 2 to 6 days long. Luckily, we have the city of Fredericton, which is about 15 minutes away, which I could use as a training area for all these courses. And then while I was at the tactics school, I was able to do my master's thesis on the urban battle of Ortona at the University of New Brunswick. And while I was also there, I was able to meet my good friend and my urban operations brother from another mother, John Spencer, down in the United States. He's the chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute at West Point. And when he found out that not only was I an urban operations instructor and I was teaching the planning, tactics, and sustainment at a higher level, but I was also an urban warfare historian, he called me his unicorn. I'm like, unicorn? He's like, Jay, I've been all over the world, talking about urban operations. I've never met a guy who's been teaching it at your higher level and who's an urban warfare historian. So I was like, I'm John Spencer's unicorn. So he got me involved with the Modern War Institute at West Point. Now John and I co-author a number of articles, and we do a number of podcasts and case studies together for the Modern War Institute. And as a result of that, I was able to become a senior fellow and instructor on the U.S. Army 40th Infantry Division's Urban Operations Planners course down in Los Angeles. Done that for 3 years in a row now. Currently with the Canadian Army Doctrine Training Center, where I'm rewriting our Urban Ops doctrinal publications. I'm working with the amazing Dr. Aditi Malhotra, who's the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Army Journal. And through a number of conversations, she has me now helping her out with 2 urban warfare themed editions of the journal. And for the past few years now, I've been invited all over the world, both online and in person, to attend conferences, publication review boards, publications, to review them. I've got other military sending me their urban ops doctrinal publications, sending me their periodicals and their journal articles for review. And I've been all over the world, both online and in person, to a number of countries now to teach urban operations planning, tactics, sustainment at the very higher level. So it's 23 years of professional, personal, practical, instructional, academic, historical, doctrinal, urban ops experience, knowledge, and writing. I realize this is looking like a self-licking ice cream cone right now, but in all honesty, I know down below there, Woody, you were nice to say urban warfare expert, but despite all this experience, and it's never been my primary job to do this, by the way, it's always been just a passion of mine, and my chains of command have always been very supportive of me doing it. But even though you say I'm an urban warfare expert down below, and John Spencer says that too, very nice of him, I don't really consider myself an expert. I think the urban environment is too challenging and too complex to really become an expert in it. So I like to think, because of my passion for the topic, I'm one of the world's leading students of urban operations, one of the world's leading students of urban warfare, because I find that I learn something new about this every year, month, week, day. So to say that I'm an expert in it, maybe I'm a passionate student of the subject, and I'll leave it at that, to be a little more humble about it.
Cool.
All right, let's get into it. So these are the resources I use, number of primary and secondary resources. And as I mentioned, I write case studies with John Collins or John Spencer, I should say, and our good friend Liam Collins for the Modern War Institute. What happens is we find a battle we want to talk about. I gather up all the resources. I write the first draft of a very fulsome chapter. And then John and Liam and we have to cut that chapter down to about 5,000 words so that that's a constraint from the editor-in-chief of the Modern War Institute, so that we can actually put it on the website. And so I was very interested in this particular battle and wrote a very fulsome chapter on it. And these are the resources I use. And I have to shout out to Dr. Philip Blood up in the top right corner with his new book, very timely, comes out the 80th anniversary of the battle. War Comes to Aachen. And Dr. Blood has been so generous with his time, hasn't he, Woody? He's coming on for 2 of your shows.
Yep.
And now he's written his book, and now he's actually producing videos that he's putting on his Twitter, his X site, where he's walking in and around Aachen. And of course, I'm going to exploit that, and I'm going to have a couple of his videos on this presentation, because because Dr. Aachen has been he might as well be Dr. Aachen.
Dr. Aachen. We've sealed it. That's going to be it.
But Dr. Blood's been so generous with his time and getting people smart and more educated on this particular city and this battle. So I'm going to exploit that by bringing him up onto my presentation as well. All right. So when we write a set of operational orders in the military, we have a concept of operations paragraph. The intent, what I'm going to get people smart on the Battle of Aachen in particular, and urban operations in general, because as an urban operations instructor, I like to draw out some of the lessons learned that can still apply for today. Scheme of maneuvers, how I'm going to do it. And this scheme of maneuver is broken down into 4 phases. I'm going to set the background, the context first, with what I call shaping operations. And then we'll talk about the urban battle, some lessons learned that I think are applicable to this battle. And then we'll have that question period. The main effort is usually a unit or an activity or a phase that has to receive the majority of resources in order to be successful, for the mission to be successful. So we're going to talk, my main effort here is the urban fighting inside the city. And then the end state is that you and your viewers, Rudy, will be able to walk away knowing a little more about the Battle of Aachen in particular, and some of the challenges and complexities of urban warfare in general. All right, so we'll start off with geographic and urban terrain. Woody, whenever we are giving orders in the military and we sit down our maps, we always make sure our troops know which way is pointed north. So all of the maps on my presentation are at the north. I say this now so I don't have to keep repeating it. There are a couple of satellite photos where north's in another direction, but I point that out. Okay, so Woody, even before at the strategic level, when it comes to geographic and urban terrain, and I find we have to talk about geographic terrain around the city and urban terrain inside the city so people understand how the troops or what the troops are going through when they're fighting it. So at the strategic level, senior political military leaders are already looking at Aachen because the shortest route to get in from Normandy into northern Germany is through Aachen. And so Aachen is already on the radar of senior political and military leaders before we even launch into Normandy in June of 1944. And then once you get to Aachen and once you get past Aachen and you're driving to Cologne, where the ground is fairly traversable and fairly observable, it's still challenging in certain aspects, but compared to some other parts of Europe. And then once you get to Cologne and you get across the Rhine, you get up to that area. And Woody, do you know what that area is up there?
I guess that's the Ruhr, isn't it?
That is the Ruhr, right? That is the German industrial military heartland. And that's where they produce most of their war material. So at the strategic level, Aachen is already on the radar because if you get to Aachen, you can bounce to Cologne and then you scoot up to the Ruhr. This is why Montgomery's launching Operation Market Garden, right, in September 44, because he wants to get the Allies into Ruhr to weaken Germany's military industrial capability by getting to the Ruhr and taking all those factories away. Going down to the operational level now, you see Aachen in the center there. West and north and northeast of the city, as the Americans are approaching it, they're realizing that the ground in the west, north, and northeast is fairly traversable. I'm not suggesting it's not challenging. There's some forest, there's some hills. But for the most part, compared to the south and the east, right here, this ground is more traversable. There's more road networks and there's more bridges across canals and waterways. So this is a city that can be easily compared to the ground to the south, more easily bypassed to the north and the northeast. And so operational commanders are looking at that and wondering if they really need to fight for the city at all. And then south and east of the city, it's considerably more hilly, more valleys, more ravines. And of course, the forests are fairly large and thick, like the Hürtgenwald that we see there in the circle. And so traveling south of the city is going to be considerably more challenging for any forces. And then at the operational level, well, remember, Woody, we were talking about, the rapid urbanization of the world, right? So these are the city's boundaries in 1944. Of course, 80 years of urbanization in and around Aachen means a lot of the towns and the villages are now connected to the city via concrete. Right. But we have to remember that back then, a lot of these towns and villages were separated from Aachen by countryside. And so we just have to think of that at the operational level. We have to understand that the city is much smaller now, or the city is much smaller in 1944 than what we see today, because that's a very modern map of the Aachen area right now. All right. Operational and tactical levels here. Aachen actually sits in a bowl. Like, it's odd because you've probably been to Italy, right, Woody, where all the towns and the villages are like up on plateaus. But here, the Aachen is one of those cities that actually sits in low ground. And it's hard to see, Woody, but this is a three-dimensional map and you can actually see the lip of the bowl. It's hard to see on the screen, but there's there's actually a lip, right? And so the challenge, of course, is that if you're defending the city, you're looking up, and if you're attacking the city, the attackers are looking down at you, and they're able to discern, where your defensive positions are, right? So there's a disadvantage for the Germans, and I have to go to Dr. Blood's video. He took this up on Crucifix Hill, Hill 239. It's Crucifix Hill because there's a giant crucifix up there. And he's going to pan to the left. See how Aachen sits in all that low ground right there?
Yep.
So if you're the German defenders, you're like, this means the Americans can come to the lip of the bowl and look down and try to discern where our defensive positions are. And as Dr. Blood pans back to the right, you can see all the high ground. Can you see my hand on the screen there, Woody?
Yeah, we can.
All the high ground in the back. Aachen is not ideally defensible because the attackers have this advantage of being able to look down into the city. And so that's not good if you're the defense at all. So that's the low ground there that Aachen sits in. And that provides an operational and tactical disadvantage for the Germans and an operational tactical advantage for the Americans. And then finally, getting down to the tactical level, Aachen is very dense urban terrain. Going to pop out again to that mapping site there. Okay, can you see my map there?
Yep, got it.
Okay, so folks, I know you like to chat on the right there, but you may have to move your fingers from the keyboard to the mouse, and I would recommend bringing up the full screen up on the YouTube there so that you can see the visuals that I'm about to present through this F4 mapping program. And as I get close down to Aachen, what's going to happen here, Woody, you're going to see the city pop up in 3 dimensions. Can you see that, Woody? Yeah?
Yep, got that. Yep.
Okay, so there's the Aachener Dome. And this is a good mapping program. The F4 map people have gotten it pretty accurate so that you can get down to almost street level and, wind your way through the streets and stuff like that, which is pretty good for guys like me. They haven't got the whole world digitized yet, but most of the world, which is pretty good. So you can see Aachen. Now, this is modern day Aachen, but the thing is that most of these buildings have been rebuilt. Have been rebuilt since then. Of course, there's a lot of new added buildings, but you can see the density of the urban terrain here, and that a lot of the buildings stand shoulder to shoulder. There's a lot of big buildings that require, maybe battalions or brigades to clear them, and they're very dense and very close together, right? And so this is, of course, going to present a challenge for the Americans who are attacking, and it's going to present give an advantage to the Germans who are defending as we move up to the factory district in the northeast corner of the city. And then we're going to scroll over to the north side of the city. What was the north side of the city back then? And this feature right here, and what I'm going to do, Woody, is I'm going to put on the ground elevations. So you get more of a 3-dimensional pop to it. So this is the Louisburg Heights. And the Louisburg Heights is a set of, it's called Observatory Hill by the Americans. But the Louisburg Heights is a set of 3 hills on the north end of Aachen. The Louisburg, the Salvatorburg, and then there's a smaller hill down here at Farwick Park. But I'm going to move around to the north side of the Louisburg Heights here. And then I'm going to come down. And when you see this, Woody, you're going to, as I zoom in, you're going to see that if you're up on the Louisburg Heights, you have a beautiful view of the city, right? So the Germans in particular are going to appreciate, like German artillery parties in particular are going to appreciate this, because then they'll be able to see where the Americans are. You see, there's the Aachener Dome there. And as the city populates, there's the Kaiserplatz over here. And then there's Farwick Park off to the left. So, I mean, if you're on top of the Louisburg Heights, you've got this beautiful view of the city. That's going to be a tactical advantage for the Germans for sure. Right. And I'm just going to zoom back out to the south side now, and then zoom out again and go back into downtown. This will populate in a second. And the other challenge the Germans didn't like it at first, but what's going to also give them an advantage, and what's going to really cripple the Americans or challenge the Americans, that a lot of these streets have a lot of rubble in them. There's been 75 Allied bombing raids since the 13th of May, 1940. 43% of the city's buildings have been destroyed. 40% have been heavily damaged. 25 churches are destroyed or damaged. A lot of the schools are destroyed and damaged. And as a result, a lot of these streets are filled with rubble. There's 3 million tons of detritus on the streets when the Americans attacked this city. And of course, that's going to challenge the Americans, because they now have to negotiate all of the rubble and the obstacles that the Germans have thrown at them in this particular city when they go do the fighting. So those are 3 advantages that the Germans have, and 3 challenges that the Americans will have at the tactical level when it comes to fighting this battle. All right, the city's urban terrain, I'll go into it a little more now. Up at the north end, of course, the Louisburg Heights, but Aachen is, its original Germanic pagan name was Aha, which means water. And the reason why that is because there's 30 mineral springs that are fed by hot water brought up from 8,000 feet below the Earth's surface. And for decades and centuries, visitors have visited Aachen to bathe in the healing hot water that Aachen gives. And so a lot of the urban terrain in the north end of the city consists of a lot of large hotels and a lot of large buildings, a lot of spas, and of course the Louisburg Heights, and a lot of wide boulevards to accommodate the tourists and the traffic as a result of all those mineral springs being in the north end of the city. At the northeast corner of the city is the factory district, and then the east and southern sides of the city is largely residential and commercial, but very dense urban terrain. And then in the center of the city, it's like a lot of old European cities there, Woody, where they're cobblestone streets and there's no design or pattern to them. The streets kind of go in every which way direction. And so it's very easy for soldiers when they're fighting to become very disoriented because the roads go all over the place if that's in that particular case. And I have to go back to Dr. Blood again in one of his fantastic videos. So you're going to see here, the other thing with the construction of a lot of the buildings in Aachen is that they're made of really thick old stone masonry, and a lot of the buildings stand shoulder to shoulder. So Dr. Blood here, he's going to move, he's going to pan to the left, and he's going to approach this building. And you're going to see how thick and big the bricks are and the masonry is. And these act as like fortified strong points for the Germans. And it means that the Americans are going to have to use a lot of munitions to try to destroy these buildings. And as Dr. Blood zooms in here, you can see the pock marks from the bullet holes. Like, these buildings are extremely hard to destroy, and you require a lot of heavy munitions in order to destroy them. And that's why you tend to use a lot more ammunition in urban operations because of buildings like this. And these buildings are all over Aachen, right? And so again, that gives the Germans a certain advantage because now they're comfortably ensconced behind these very thick-walled buildings. And it's going to give the Americans will have to use a lot of heavy munitions in order to destroy buildings like that. And especially in the downtown core, a lot of these buildings stand shoulder to shoulder. And look how thick and impenetrable that masonry is. Like, that's just incredible. That's very hard to destroy. And that's going to give the Germans a little bit of an advantage in this particular. Okay, so let's go into some background now. So there's some operational and tactical challenges when it comes to Aachen itself. And that's, first is the two for the Germans and two for the Americans. First is the geography in and around the city. So the German commander who takes over the defense of Aachen on the 13th of September 1944 is General Lieutenant Count Gerhard von Schwerin. And he's become very disillusioned with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. And for reasons that I'm going to talk about on the next slide, Hitler has decreed that Aachen will be defended. But von Schwerin, when he arrives in Aachen on the 13th, he tells his rather shocked subordinates that he has no plans on defending the city. He's going to defy Hitler's orders and not defend the city because he doesn't think it's worth it. Now, Woody, you mentioned earlier on, 40% of the fighting in the Second World War was in urban. And so the Germans are very familiar with the fact that the defenders usually lose in urban operations. The defenders usually start off with an initial advantage. But throughout my study of urban warfare history, I find that defenders usually lose in urban operations if the attackers have a good operational plan and they're applying good tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs. And so von Schwerin is like, why should I lose my division fighting for a city that will eventually be taken anyway? So he has every intent of surrendering the city and besides, the Americans are just going to bypass me in the north anyway. So because of the geography in and around the city, von Schwerin doesn't want to fight it. Ironically, General Clarence Hubner, who is the American commander of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One, because they have a Big Red One on their divisional patch, he doesn't want to fight for the city either. And he actually convinces his corps commander, Lieutenant Joe Collins of the 7th Corps, not to fight for the city. Joe, we can just bypass the city to the north and the south, and we don't have to fight for it, because Hubner realizes he's going to have to use a lot of resources to fight for the city. Because our urban fighting can be very resource intensive. And so because the geography in and around the city, it offers no operational tactical advantage to either the Germans or the Americans. And unlike most other cities around the world, Aachen has had very little defensive preparations built into the city over the centuries. Like a lot of cities, they actually build defenses in them that last for decades or centuries. But in Aachen, that's not the particular case. And so the Germans, they've already got some things going for them, the dense urban terrain, the thickness of the building, the rubble in the streets. But there's been no deliberate defensive preparations of the city over the centuries. And so that's a disadvantage. The other thing for the Americans is that Aachen is not vital to the war effort. It was talked about in Dr. Blood's program the other day when somebody asked him what were the industrial factories producing, and Dr. Blood mentioned a lot of textiles, radio parts, motor parts, electrical parts, and railroads. I think were the main industrial, like not war-winning material at all. That's the Ruhr. We got to get up to the Ruhr to knock Germany out of the war and to weaken their defense positions. But the Americans, like, if we take Aachen, it's not really going to make a big difference, for German war production at all. And also for the Americans and for the Allies overall is Market Garden in September has sucked up a lot of resources, right? And of course, Germans are destroying all the channel ports on the English Channel, And so all the logistics, all the sustainment, all the bullets and the beans and the gasoline is coming from Normandy, right? And so the Allies come to a stop in September because Market Garden sucked up a lot of resources, and because they're getting all their logistics from Normandy, there's not much forward movement, right? And of course, the Germans call this the miracle in the West because they're able to reinforce and resupply, right? Yep. So to attack Aachen right now when we have logistical challenges is not opportune, but it does have a strategic value, and that's the historical significance, right? Adolf Hitler deems Aachen extremely important. Why? Well, of course, it's the birth of Charlemagne. He was born there and he rests there. And of course, the Holy Roman Empire from 813 to 1531 AD, which Hitler stylizes as the First Reich. And then, of course, Bismarck from 1871 to 1918 is the Second Reich. And of course, Hitler styles his regime as the Third Reich. So, of course, to Hitler, Aachen is important. It has a historical significance, right? Because that's the birthplace of the First Reich. So you can't, and 32 kings have been subsequently crowned in Aachen. And of course, Hitler sees himself as their successor, right? So to Hitler, Aachen has a historical significance. And that's why he says it's going to become a festoon city, a fortress city that must be defended. And not only that, but all eyes are on Aachen. Now, the Americans are able to take smaller towns and villages, to the north and the east and the south of Aachen. But Aachen is really the first large German city that's going to be fought for. And all the German people and all the allies are looking at Aachen like this is a symbol now of German strength and courage if we can defend it, or it's a symbol of German weakness if the Americans can actually take it, right? So there's a huge symbolic value to fighting for this city, and literally all eyes are on Aachen. And if the Allies can take Aachen, that signals to the German people that the end is coming sooner than later, because now a first large German city has been taken. Yeah. Aachen's got the operational value, though. It's located just east of the Siegfried line in the Westfall, what the Germans call the Westfall. Of course, Dan's fantastic presentation on that yesterday. And when I talk about the Battle of Ortona there, Woody, I talk about how Ortona was like the anchor point of the Gustav line. And I'll suggest that because it's a large, dense urban area just a couple miles east of the Siegfried line of the Westfall, Aachen can act as a further defensive point for the Siegfried line in the Westfall. I would argue that. That's my bias as an urban operations instructor, of course. And then one of the other challenges is that you're going to see the overall plan here in a moment. But Aachen is a large, dense urban area, and the 1st U.S. Army is moving west to east. And what happens is U.S. 19th Corps is going to be north of Aachen, and the rest of 1st U.S. Army is south of Aachen. So General Courtney Hodges is not going to be happy about that because, commanders don't like having to split up their units because of the geographic terrain. That's not ideal. And of course, Operation Wacht am Rhein, which of course becomes the Second Battle of the Ardennes, or more colloquially known as the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's already planning for that. And Hitler's like, we can't let the Allies take Aachen, because Aachen is directly north of the Herkenwald, which is, of course, the Ardennes is a little further south than that. But if I'm going to launch my second Ardennes offensive towards Antwerp, I can't have the Allies being able to punch into the north side of that flank by using Aachen as a staging area for it. So there's an operational value to Aachen as well.
I just wanted to add just quickly your point about Aachen being symbolic. I mean, it's not like Hitler hadn't got caught up in symbolic cities in the past, Stalingrad, Leningrad, and also, I suppose the Allies have been nudging the German border, nudging the Rhine for weeks, going back to Metz, but Metz doesn't get concluded till December. Right. So I can see the point of the Allies needing to make a claim on somewhere that your average person in the West can kind of find on a map, somewhere notable, somewhere I've heard of that, that makes sense.
Yeah, very much. Okay, the Germans, that's my best German accent, Woody. That's all I can do. That's all. I'm sorry. It's my go-to joke for Ortona, by the way. The Germans. That's all I can do. All right, so it's the Germans. Their order of battle, their order of bat. 81st Corps, commanded by General Lieutenant Friedrich Schack and then Friedrich Kochling on 20 September. It's got 4 divisions inside of it. 116th Greyhound Panzer Division, commanded by General Lieutenant Count Gerhard von Schwerin, the gentleman I talked about earlier. He takes command of the defense of Aachen on the 13th September, 1944. There's 3 other divisions, the 49th Infantry Division, the 183rd Volksgrenadier Division, and the 12th Infantry Division. For military map, folks, these are military map symbols for those folks not familiar. Red diamonds mean the enemy. And if you are a military map symbol aficionado, please forgive me because I do get a little loosey-goosey with the military map symbols in this presentation due to space. But remember, I told you von Schwerin doesn't want to defend Aachen, and he shocks his subordinates on the 13th when he takes command, saying he's not going to defend it. He's going to surrender it to the Americans. And he even writes a letter, and he gives it to the local postmaster to deliver to the Americans. Well, the letter, of course, is given to the chain of command. And von Schwerin now has to go into hiding on the 15th of September as the Gestapo and the SS go looking for him because he's defied Hitler's orders. And his subordinates are so loyal to him, they refuse to give up his location. And he finally surrenders himself on the 18th of September. And ironically, you'd think, well, this means immediate execution for him and his family. He gets, but all of the charges are dropped or dismissed, amazingly enough. But the challenge with that now is that Hitler doesn't trust the 116th Greyhound Division because his subordinates, because von Schwerin's subordinates were more loyal to von Schwerin than they were to Hitler. So he doesn't want the 116th Division defending Aachen anymore. So the 246th Volksgrenadier Division, commanded by Oberstleutnant Maximilian Leher, is now given the task of taking over Aachen. They do a relief in place on the 28th of September and take over the defense on the 29th of September. And if you look, Woody, these 4 divisions total only about 18,000 personnel. Now, ideally, if it's a perfect world with all rainbows and pots of gold, a division has about 15 to 20,000 personnel each. But these 4 divisions only total about 18,000 personnel. So each division is only about a quarter of its strength. And that includes the 246th Volksgrenadier Division, which is commanded by it's commanded by Leher right now, but Oberst Colonel Gerhard Wilk is going to take over on the 12th of October. And the 404th Regiment's been detached to another division. The 689th Division has a battalion detached, and the other battalion is made up of 50 to 60-year-old German men. The 352nd Division's had some tough fighting, and it's lost a battalion to another division, and it's only got about 1,000 personnel in its remaining division. The Diendl Division only has about 500 troops, and they're a mixture of units. The 19th Luftwaffe Division is an Air Force unit that's been remustered to become infantry. So their morale, because if you were to ask anybody in the Air Force if they want to become infantry, they will say no.
No.
So their morale is really low. The 246th Artillery Division, the 246th Artillery Battalion has about 19 artillery pieces and 6 150 millimeter guns. 6 of those artillery guns are horse-drawn. The 1043rd Battalion and the 34th Machine Gun Battalion fill out the rest of the division. There's 5 Panzer, so a platoon plus of Panzer IV medium tanks. There's 120 local police officers, civilian police officers from Aachen. And then late additions to the urban fighting, you're going to have 80 police officers from the city Cologne. And then you're going to have the 1st SS Hitler Battalion commanded by Herbert Rink. He's going to join the division later on in the fighting. But the division is severely under strength. There are defenses. So Leher puts his headquarters at the Hotel Quellenhof at Farwick Park in the northeast corner of the city. And then he's got logistical stockpiles co-located with him. Most of the human-made defenses, are on the west and the south side of the city. And the reason why the Germans have built them there is because the Germans make the assumption that when the Americans attack through the Siegfried Line, through the Westwall, they're going to attack the city from the west and the southwest. So that's why they're building a majority of their defenses in these locations. But the Americans have a mitigation for that. When you did that talk with Ronan a couple weeks back there, Woody, on the Battle of Brest, one of the great points that I thought Ronan brought up was you don't move on the streets. Like, the streets are the killing zones, right? And the Americans and the Germans quickly learned that at Brest, right? And so the Germans, remember, this isn't their first urban warfare defense. And so they're only going to move at night or through sub-training systems. If they're going to move at day, they're going to stay inside the buildings. There's a railway embankment in the southeast corner. I'm going to get into that later on, the details of that later on, but it acts as an obstacle. And of course, there's the rubble from all the raids.
Yeah.
All right. The Americans. All right, here we go. So starting at the top, for military map symbols, blue rectangles mean friendly forces. So you got General Courtney Hodges, 1st U.S. Army at the top. He's got 3 corps. He's got Major General Charles Corlett, 19th Corps. He's got Major General Lightning Joe Collins, 7th Corps. And he's got Major General Leonard Geroux, who spells his last name slightly wrong, the 5th Corps. I didn't put the subunits of the 19th and the 5th Corps on there, Woody, because I didn't want to complicate the slide. Okay, and then so under Lightning Joe's 7th Corps, he's got the 3rd Armored Division, He's got Hubner's Big Red 1, and he's got the 9th Infantry Division. And again, the 3rd Armored and the 9th Infantry Division have their own regiments, and I don't want to complicate the slide, so I'll just focus on the Big Red 1. It's got the 16th, 18th, and 26th Infantry Regiments, the 26th commanded by Colonel John Seitz. And then it's got 2 battalions in the 1106th Engineer Regiment. And then 26th Infantry Regiment is going to be doing the majority of the fighting in Aachen. And so Colonel Seitz has 3 battalions, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. The 1st is going to be detached to the 3rd Armored Division. And so that means he's only got 2 infantry battalions to do the fight. He's got the 2nd Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Daryl Daniel. He's got 3rd Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel John Corley, but he does have 2 companies attached from the 745th Tank Battalion. And then later on in the fight, these 3 battalions are going to join later in the fight, the 1st of the 33rd, the 2nd of the 36th, which consists of Task Force Hogan, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Hogan's task force, and then another 2nd Battalion for the 110th Infantry Regiment. So basically, these are the units that you see highlighted. These are the units that are going to be doing the urban fighting inside the city, just to make it a little more clear to everybody. All right, now there's not a lot of blue rectangles, and there's a lot of red diamonds on those slides, right, Woody? And you're starting to look at the personnel, and at maximum, the Americans have about 3,500 personnel going into the city fight, and the Germans have anywhere from 4,000 to 6,500. The resources aren't clear as to how many Germans exactly, but anywhere from 4,000 to 6,500. Now, the doctrinal template for attacking to defending is 3 to 1. You want 3 attackers to every 1 defender.
Yep.
But in this case, the Germans are outnumbering the Americans when it comes to personnel. But when it comes to force ratios, you can't just look at personnel. You've also got to look at a lot of the weapon systems and weapons platforms that are going to be brought into the fight. So what's going to help the Americans in this particular case? First of all, the Big Red 1's got lots of combat experience. It's been in the war since November of 1942. It's fought through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, landed in Normandy, fought through Northwest Europe. A lot of the senior commanders and planners have a lot of combat and a lot of planning experience, and they've gone through a number of urban battles already. Some of the German defenders are substandard. Not all of them, but some of them are substandard. And like I told you, the Luftwaffe folks are not happy right now. And some of the 50 and 60-year-old men in that 1 battalion are not happy at all either. The 26th Infantry Regiment is going to receive a number of enablers. And when I say enablers, Woody, I'm talking about weapons platforms and weapon systems and specialist personnel that are going to enable the frontline units to fight the battle that much easier. All right, and you're going to see the number of enablers that the 26th Infantry Regiment receives in a couple slides. And then Stolberg, Germany, which is east of Aachen, actually gets attacked. And the Germans put up a pretty good stout defense there from the 1st Battalion of the 16th Infantry Regiment, so much so that the 1st Battalion of the 26th Infantry Regiment has to go join them. And the Americans learned some really hard lessons in Stolberg. Like, for example, if you're throwing 2 battalions from 2 different infantry regiments in there, you got to have some good coordination. And you got to have your urban tactics, techniques, and procedures down pat. And so this very recent experience at Stolberg helps out not only the Big Red 1, but helps out Colonel Seitz and his 26th Infantry Regiment, because he's had a battalion now do an urban fight very close to the Battle of Aachen, and they can draw out some good lessons learned from that particular fight in Stolberg. A second thing going for them is that the Americans have done a number of urban operations already in Northwest Europe. So they're pretty good at this kind of stuff of analyzing what the challenges are. So they've already figured out that they're going to have high ammunition expenditures. How are they going to mitigate that? Well, first of all, they're going to have these M29 Weasels, which are small tracked vehicles. They're going to be able to bring the bullets and the beans and the ammunition up, and they're going to be able to take the casualties back. And because they're tracked vehicles, they're going to be able to negotiate a lot of the rubble a lot easier. The big piles, maybe not, but the small piles, they will, right? So that's good. And not only that, but the Americans are going to have commodity points, which are temporary locations of 1 or 2 type of a commodity like ammunition or water or medical supplies. And those commodity points are only going to be 2 or 3 city blocks behind the frontline troops. So the M29 Weasels are going to be consistently cycling bullets and beans forward, and they're going to be cycling medics back this entire battle. And that will overcome the high ammunition expenditures because the ammunition is going to be right there, really close by. Command and control challenges, as soon as your platoon, company, battalion, brigade gets into those buildings or in the subterranean systems, you automatically lose all communications with them. And so what the Americans do is they make these maps called measles sheets. And on these maps, they've got the entire city and all the buildings marked with these little red dots. And beside those little red dots are little alphanumeric code names. Alpha 1, 2, Bravo 2, 3, Charlie C4, whatever. And so this way, when the Americans are fighting this battle, they issue thousands of these maps to the troops. So this way, when they're fighting the battle, if the troops get on the radio or if they send runners back and they go, right, we've got a platoon in building Alpha 1, 2, they can communicate that to higher, and they make sure that no friendly fire goes into Alpha 1, 2 because they know friendly forces are there. The Germans are in building Delta 2, 4. Okay, let's put fire on Delta 2, 4. And because the Air Force pilots and the artillery have the maps too, they can look and see which building is Delta 2, 4 and then drop the rounds down on those particular buildings. So good command and control challenges using the measles sheets. Throughout my urban warfare historical research, Woody, I find that about 10% of an urban population stays in an urban area, even if they know an urban battle is coming, because they have nowhere to go. The mean American soldiers are going to steal our furniture or our personal possessions. Oh, we can just hide in the basement and wait for the urban storm to pass us by, right? And so at first Hitler had ordered an evacuation of the city, but von Schwerin put a stop to it because, of course, well, I'm going to give up the city anyway, so why do that? And besides, the civilians are looting everything in the city, so we got to put a stop to that too. So there's about, the resources differ as to numbers, but anywhere from 5 to 20,000 civilians in the city, right? And the Americans are the good guys. And what they don't want to do is they don't want to kill civilians. So what they're going to do is they're going to have a proactive plan on to safely remove civilians when they're encountered and get them out of the city when it's safe to do so. And I'm going to go into that plan a little bit later on during the presentation. And then finally, you don't win urban battles without tanks and armored personnel carriers and armored fighting vehicles. An urban legend out there, pun intended, that you can't bring tanks into urban fights, but you have to, you must. And the Americans are recognizing this. So there's got to be a symbiotic relationship of protection between the tanks and the infantry and the engineers and the artillery. So the tanks aren't in front while the infantry is doing a conga line behind the tanks. The infantry and the engineers are ahead of the tanks, making sure that nobody can sneak up on the tanks to destroy them while the tanks are firing down range at targets. And so, and the artillery is coming down too to help out. So it's this symbiotic relationship of protection of the tanks protecting the infantry, engineers, and artillery, and the infantry, engineers, artillery protecting the tanks. Not only that, but the tankers know, don't just drive down the streets. We're going to creep up to a corner. We're going to peek around the corner with our optics and our weapon systems, and we're going to use a lot of the building to protect most of the tank. And so the American tankers are very much veterans of this kind of fighting, and so they know not to expose their tanks on big wide streets. So these are the mitigations that they've come up with to overcome these 4 challenges. And then finally, Woody, I was talking about the enablers. All of these weapons platforms, weapon systems, and specialist personnel, they're going to be pushed right down to the battalion commanders and the company commanders. And you have to do this in urban operations because, when you're fighting the bad guys and they're inside buildings, well, they can move from position to position really quickly, or they can move from building to building really quickly, or street to street really quickly. And you don't have time to wait for that divisional asset or that brigade asset to be pushed down, because by the time it gets down to you, half an hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours later, the defenders have gone, right? So the battalion commanders and the company commanders, and I would even say the platoon commanders and even the section/squad commanders have to have these enablers right in their back pocket so they can be used right away. And so on top of their organic weapon systems, they're given all of these additional weapon systems and weapons platforms, which is like any battalion commander and company commander today would salivate over this kind of firepower being under their control, because this way they're able to deliver violence that much quicker and destroy defensive positions that much quicker.
And is that kind of a sign of the times, Jayson? I mean, I see that kind of developing in Normandy, anti-aircraft half tracks being used to support river crossings, all that kind of stuff. You have tools that have a primary purpose, but by time you get to September, October, is, as you say, that it's just about hitting everything you can at an area. So you just put lots and lots of rounds from different types of weapons on there. Is that kind of, are the Allies kind of beginning to peak at that kind of technique?
Yeah, well, they've learned it already in Italy, right? They've already learned that in Sicily and Italy. So by the time they get to Northwest Europe, there's some new divisions obviously in the fight, but then they have to learn it, but they learn it pretty quick. And so by the time they get up into Belgium and they're closing on Germany, they've got that pretty much down pat.
Cool.
So, good to go. All right. So we got to talk about the plans, and we got to start at the top for this one. So first, U.S. Army, General Courtney Hodges, that's him up on the right. Phase 1. Okay, so Major General Charles Corlett, he's left forward in the north area of operations We got Lieutenant Joe Collins in the center, and then we got Major General Geroux in the right forward. For phase one of Courtney Hodges' plan, phase one is going to have Corlett get a division to the town of Verselin, just northeast of Aachen. And then Lieutenant Joe, for phase two of this plan, Lieutenant Joe is going to push a division south and then east of Aachen. And then phase two will have them linking up with the 19th Corps up at Verselin. And then phase three will be the attack into Aachen itself. Now, why I say this is critical is because in urban operations, if you leave a gap open because you're hoping the enemy will withdraw, the enemy won't do that. Remember, urban operations in the urban environment is very complex and very challenging. And the enemy wants to fight us in cities because of its complexity and its challenges. So it's absolutely a must that you isolate the city physically and or with firepower and on the electromagnetic spectrum so that the bad guys can't talk to their friends on the outside of the city. So this way, you completely cut off the enemy. And once they're completely isolated, physically and or with firepower, using firepower to fill in the gaps that you can't, locate or occupy physically, they're going to run out of people, and they're going to run out of bullets, and they're going to run out of medical supplies, and run out of water, and run out of rations, right? So it's absolutely critical that you isolate your urban objective. It doesn't matter if it's a platoon with a house, or a company with a building, or a battalion with a street or a suburb, or a brigade with a small town, or a division or corps with a city. Isolate your urban objective, and you make the battle shorter because the enemy runs out of stuff. The enemy runs out of ammunition and water and food and personnel, right? So this is absolutely critical. Let's go down to 7th Corps. So Lieutenant Joe's got the Big Red 1 in left forward. He's got the 3rd Armored Division center. It's going to go to Stolberg, and 9th Infantry Division is south of them. So you can see the 30th Old Hickory, commanded by Major General Leland Hobbs of 19th Corps. They're going to be the ones who are going to go to Verselin. And then the Big Red 1's also going to go to Verselin itself. Okay, we'll go down to the Big Red 1. So once they get past Aachen, General Hubner turns his infantry regiments from southwest to northeast. So we'll start at northeast. 16th Infantry Regiment is going to be the right flank protection. It's going to tie into the 3rd Armored Division at Stolberg. And then 18th Infantry Regiment, phase one of Colonel Hubner's plan, 18th Infantry Regiment is going to fight northwards, and it's going to be the infantry regiment that links up with the Old Hickories up at Verselin, thus isolating the city. And then Colonel Seitz's 26th Infantry Regiment is going to launch phase two, and that'll be the attack into Aachen itself. Okay, Colonel Seitz's plan, he's going to have 2nd and 3rd Battalions going into the city fight. 3rd Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel John Corley up in the northeast corner with not only that tank company attached, but with all those other enablers. And then Daryl Daniel in the southeast is going to break in and gain lodgement down there, and he's got a company attached as well. The 1106th Engineer Regiment and the 33rd Artillery Battalion are going to be south flank protection. And then for phase one, there's going to be a very intensive, very detailed fires plan. And when I say fires, I mean close air support, artillery, and mortars. That's going to rock the city. And what's going to happen is the artillery and the mortars are going to mark defensive positions that they think are occupied by the Germans with red smoke bombs. And then the Air Force is going to come in with their P-38s and P-47s, and they're going to strike those targets. And then they're methodically going to go from building to building to building, and then street to street to street, so that they can destroy some of those defensive positions that are on the edges of the city. And then for phase two of Colonel Seitz's plan, 3rd Battalion is going to clear the Foundry District, the Factory District, Farwick Park, and the Lewisburg Heights. And then 2nd Battalion is going to work its way northwest and clear the center of Aachen and get to that railway, which is the objective. And then down below, the 1106th Engineer Regiment, the 33rd Artillery Battalion, they're going to move west as the battalions are moving west to provide that flank protection and any artillery support there. And then finally, we go up to 3rd Battalion now. So Colonel Corley's got an interesting plan. He's got Lucien Corwell's K Company first in the order of march. And then he's going to have Walter Necky's Heavy Weapons Company following in behind them. And then he's going to have battalion headquarters. And then he's going to have Seth Bott's I Company last in the order of march, going single file through the Factory District. He's going to detach William Chaplin's L Company to 2nd Battalion, because the problem that Corley and Daryl Daniel have is that there's this big gap in between the two battalions, right? So L Company's task is to link up with 2nd Battalion and make sure there's no gap that the Germans can infiltrate through. And I think what Corley was thinking here was a concentration of force. If he can push K Company through, and if he needs to, he can support them with any of the heavy weapons from Walter Necky's Heavy Weapons Company. And then if he needs to, he can have Seth Botts do a forward passage of lines to carry on with the fight. So I think that's his planning for why he's moving in single file here. Daryl Daniels, though, he's got a different plan altogether. His scheme of maneuvers is different altogether because he's got a wider part of the city. And so what he does is he put F Company Roland Weeks, F Company right forward. He's got Captain Ozell Smoot's E Company center. And he's got Lieutenant B.So. Walker's G Company left forward. And then he's going to have Fuller's Heavy Weapons Companies provide mortars and machine guns when applicable. When L Company comes down from 3rd Battalion, they'll be able to join the 2nd Battalion and carry on with the fight. Now, I got knock them all down on there because Daryl Daniel tells his subordinate company commanders, look, I don't care what kind of buildings we fight. Remember, Germany's been raining havoc on everybody for 5 years now. And so Daryl Daniel could really care less about destroying buildings. And he's like, when it comes to buildings, knock them all down because no building is worth the lives of my soldiers. He doesn't care how old the building is or what it's in symbolism or antiquity or whatever. Knock them all down. Just use overwhelming firepower to destroy these German defensive positions. And of course, every historian since then has made sure that, knock them all down gets featured in the title or subtitle of their chapter of their book on this particular battle. All right. You ready there, Woody, for the fight?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fantastic. And I mean, I'm looking at those maps there. I'm just thinking about, well, what Ronan was saying about Brest is that, you talked about the buildings as they are. An urban environment like that is just a sponge for infantry, isn't it? You lose. How are they planning to just keep their units together and keep that concentrated firepower? Because as you said, you lose a squad here, you lose a squad here, and we're talking about companies and battalions in that environment can get lost really quickly.
Oh yeah, very much so, right? So that's why all those enablers are so important, right? All those weapons platforms and weapon systems, because they're going to help the infantry make sure that the infantry and the dismounted engineers are less casualties by using firepower.
Right.
So that's great. Okay, so the Aachen campaign goes from the 2nd to the 21st of October. The city fighting actually doesn't begin to the 12th of October. So for the next 2 slides, I have to very briefly talk about what happens between the 2nd and the 11th, because that sets the context for the fighting inside the city. So remember, U.S. Army's first phase is for the Old Hickory, for everybody to get through the Siegfried line. And you could spend a whole other podcast just on the fighting the Siegfried line. And it takes about a day or two. This was a question yesterday with Dan's lecture, but it takes about a day or two for the Americans to get through the Siegfried line. Not easily, but they are able to do it. And then they're able to push east and start clearing out German towns and villages east of the Siegfried line and the Westfall. Now, the Old Hickories capture Alsdorf, which is just northeast of Würselen. I'm going to pop out to the mapping program here. Off the ground elevation. Okay, and the reason why this is important is because you can see my map there, Woody. Good to go?
Yep,
Yeah? Okay, good. So there's Aachen right there. There's Würselen, and Alsdorf is up here in the north. There's only 2 roads, right? Because the Americans have isolated the city, there's only 2 roads that go into Aachen. And those 2 roads need to be opened because the Germans need reinforcements and resupplies, right? Well, by the 119th Infantry Regiment of the Old Hickory Division is able to capture Alsdorf, and they cut off the northern part of this road, which means now the Germans have to winkle their way through the countryside to get to this road in order to resupply and reinforce into Aachen. So right now the Germans are very, very concerned that because the Americans have taken Alsdorf, that the half of the ability to reinforce and resupply the city has now been cut off. So that's pretty significant. Now, the Old Hickories are supposed to take Würselen first before phase 2 is launched, but because of the fighting takes so long to get to Würselen, between the 2nd and the 7th, Courtney Hodges tells Lightning Joe, who tells Clarence Hubner, launch 1st Infantry Division. They've got to get up to Würselen. We can't wait anymore. So they assume some risk here, and they trigger phase 2 before the end of phase 1. So you have concurrent phases going on. So the old Big Red One, the Big Red One's 18th Infantry Regiment starts fighting towards Würselen. On the 9th, the Old Hickories actually reach Würselen's northern outskirts, which is great. But then the German forces launch this huge counterattack with several battalions, and they take Badenburg. And Badenburg is right here. And so now there's this little mini battle of the Bulge, because you have the Americans in Alsdorf, you have the Americans in Würselen, and you have the Germans in this bulge in Badenburg. And so now the 119th Infantry Regiment is being threatened to be cut off because the Germans are in Badenburg, and that's a huge pain to the Americans. So there's continued fighting to push that bulge back on the 10th, and then finally the Old Hickories take it on the 11th. On the 10th, the 18th Infantry reaches Verselin's southern outskirts. So you have the Old Hickories at the northern outskirts and 18th Infantry is at the southern outskirts, but they still haven't closed that gap, right? So now that road is still available for the Germans to squeak reinforcements and resupplies through. Hubner had tried to convince Lieutenant Joe Collins back in September that Aachen wasn't worth it because, we can just bypass the city to the north and the south and carry on to Cologne, right? Get to the Ruhr. But Hubner tries again to avoid the urban combat, and he issues an ultimatum to Le Hare. So he has 3 American soldiers, obviously. He has 3 soldiers. Lieutenant Cedric Lafley is an intelligence officer. Lieutenant William Boehm speaks fluent German, and their driver, Private First Class Kenneth Kading. They get in a Jeep, and they drive into Aachen with a big white flag. They link up with some Germans who blindfold them, take them to a basement. They meet up with a Lieutenant Keller. And it's about 11 o'clock, and these 3 Americans say, here's the ultimatum from General Hubner to your commander. You have 24 hours to give up the city, to surrender the city, or else we're going to destroy the city. And just to reinforce the communication, there's also local public speaker broadcasts, public broadcasts on the radio, and leaflets dropped on the city, telling the German soldiers that this ultimatum's been given to Le Hare, right? And so the Germans passed that up the chain of command. The Americans smoked some cigarettes with their German friends because that was the kind of thing you did back then. And then they get back in their Jeep and they drive out of the city. So they went in the city around 10:20. They linked up with the Germans around 11 o'clock. They're out of the city by 12 o'clock. And Le Hare replies back that he's not going to surrender the city at all. On the 11th of October, the Old Hickories take Brandenburg. That's great. They push the Bulge out. The ultimatum deadline passes, and you're going to see that the coordinated fires plan in a moment. So the airstrikes and the artillery fire is going to strike, and the engineers have some fun. So Staff Sergeant David Belavia fought in the Second Battle of Fallujah in Iraq in December 2004, and he said in his book House to House, he's like, the engineers are the intellectuals of the combat arms. They can come up with a lot of nifty ideas that the knuckle dragging infantry folk can't even conceive of. And so the engineers, remember, they're the south flank protection, right? They find a streetcar. Well, they pack it full of 2 tons of explosives, and they label it the V13 because the number 13 was on the streetcar. They label it the V13, which is a subtle reference to the V1 and the V2 vengeance weapons that Hitler has. And they even find a portrait of Hitler, and they put it in the driver's seat. And then they take a tank and they push the streetcar over the lip of the bowl to have it go down into the city, and it has a timed fuse on it. Well, the streetcar is too heavy. It's got its engine in it. So the streetcar only goes down a few hundred meters and then it blows up. But undaunted, the engineers find a second streetcar and they pack it full of explosives. And then they take the engine out and then they push that second streetcar. The streetcar starts going down the hill. It runs into the wreckage of the first streetcar and it blows up. And then they find a third streetcar and they pack it full of explosives. Some engineers run forward and they clear the wreckage off the tracks of the streetcar rails. And then the tank pushes the third streetcar down. It actually goes down and into the city and it explodes. And the engineers gleefully cheer. And we have no idea whether it actually damaged any defenses or not. But the engineers, the intellectuals of the combat arms, apparently. So there we go. All right. The ultimatum passes on around 11 o'clock on 11th of October. Look at this fires plan, this close air support and artillery mortars plan there, Woody. So from 11 o'clock to 15:45, P-47s and P-38s dropping 62 tons of explosives on the city. And then 10 minutes after they're done, 12 battalions of artillery open up with over 4,800 shells. And then the next morning, they all return and they drop another 99 tons of bombs and 5,000 shells into the city. And I'm telling you, if you're the 3rd or 2nd Battalion's infantry or engineers or tankers, you're gleefully watching this happen because, that's a lot of firepower going downrange to destroy these defensive positions. And there's mixed results. Certainly, some defensive positions are destroyed, but it also creates a lot more rubble that the Americans have to fight through. Right. Yeah. So you have to take the good with the bad, right? The bad with the good in this particular case. But that's an awesome fires plan, very well coordinated, and a lot of munitions going downrange. All right. The Americans aren't the only one they attack. Remember, the Germans are very concerned about that one road that's open. It's got to stay open now. And so the 1st SS Panzer Corps goes on the attack in the very early morning of the 12th of October, where it's trying to widen the gap in between the 119th Regiment and the 18th Regiment. And they're going to do this for the next 5 days. They're going to continue throwing attack after attack after attack. And as an urban operations instructor, I can't be worried about what's going on just inside the city. I've got to figure out what's going on outside the city too, because they're both going to affect each other, right? And so these consistent attacks by 1st SS Panzer Corps are going to be a continual thorn to the Americans for the next 4 or 5 days, because they're always looking over their shoulder, wondering if the Germans are going to break through, right? Because that road right there is the only thing that's sustaining the 246th Volksgrenadier Regiment Division inside Aachen. All right, so this day, only the 3rd Battalion's in the fight. So the ultimatum passes at 1100 hours. You got all that close air support and artillery strikes going on. At 1100 hours, Colonel Corley crosses the line of departure and he pushes his forces forward. K Company's in the lead. Lucien Corwell's K Company's in the lead. They go down a couple secondary streets and they run into a couple of machine gun positions. They bring up some M4 Sherman tanks. They fire a dozen rounds, destroy the 2 positions. Fantastic. Good to go using those tanks. And then they get to a foundry, and the Germans have actually protected the foundry's walls with raw sheets of German armor that's used for tanks. So as the tanks are firing at the foundry, the shells are just bouncing off the foundry. So Lucien Corwell now has to fight his company forward and get into the foundry itself, where close quarter combat now becomes the norm between the Americans and the Germans. Now, the problem with this is that as Lucien Corwell is fighting his company through the foundry, the battalion's now stopped, like it's lost all momentum, right? And Woody, you've heard it. Every military plan is perfect until you cross the line of departure, right?
Yeah.
So Colonel Corley was thinking going single file through the foundry district. Well, now K Company's stuck fighting in the foundry. So what he does, he turns to Seth Botts and he turns to Walter Nicky. And he's like, okay, we're not going anywhere. I've got to maintain the momentum. Start moving northwest and get up to those railway tracks and get up to the railway station at those railway tracks. So K Company fights through the foundry, as you see here in the text on the left, and they're able to, finally K Company takes the foundry and they link up with I Company at the railway station at 1345 hours. And then Corley reports that the factory district is clear by 1500 hours. I question that because he still has a lot more district to go through. And then it's at this point where Corley's like, you know what? If this is the kind of momentum I'm going to achieve, I'm going to need L Company back. So he goes to Colonel Seitz and he goes to Daryl Daniel and he says, look, L Company will keep its same task. It's still tasked with linking up with 2nd Battalion, but I might need them every once in a while in this fight because I need all my rifle companies into this urban fight, right? So Colonel Seitz says, no problem. And Corley gets his company back, but it still has the same task of linking up with 2nd Battalion. All right, so 2nd Battalion is strictly a planning day, and the challenge is that railway embankment I mentioned earlier. Yep. So that railway embankment's about 15 to 30 feet high in places, and it's fairly steep. There's a tunnel that goes through it, but when the reconnaissance is done, they notice that the tunnel, which you can see in the bottom left corner, is completely crammed and filled with garbage and crap and obstacles. The Germans have filled that tunnel completely. And the engineers report to Colonel Daniel that it's going to take about 24 hours to clear that tunnel. Well, Daniel doesn't want to go into this urban fight without tank support and tank destroyer support. So he actually tasks the tank platoon commander that's attached to him. He's like, go up to that embankment and see if you can get your tanks over the embankment. So he drives up there, he looks at the embankment, he comes back, and the tank commander says, sir, it's going to be hard. I'm going to have to drive my tanks really quickly, but I'm pretty sure my tanks can climb the embankment. And then when they get to the other side, they'll probably do somersaults, but I promise they'll land right side up on the other side and you'll have your tank support. So Daniel's like, all right, I'll assume some risks there. But he's also going to have a very good close air support and artillery fire plan that makes sure his troops get across that embankment. While the engineers are clearing out that tunnel, and he has to do that. He has to do that so he can get more tanks and more tank destroyers into the fight. So it's going to take 24 engineers. It's going to take 24 hours for those engineers to clear out that tunnel. And Dr. Blood makes sure he destroys a certain myth when it comes to that tunnel, by the way. And I'm going to talk about that later on.
Yeah.
Right. So remember, Leher is in command right now, but Oberst Gerhard Wilk is going to take command on the 12th of October. He's sworn in as the divisional commander down at the 7th Army. Then he hops in his car with the German equivalent of a political officer and his driver. He drives 85 kilometers through the countryside. He's able to sneak through the gap, and he actually crosses the Würm River at a very shallow ford. Some German civilians show him as a very shallow ford across the Würm River, and he actually is able to get into the city. And he gets to Hotel Quellenhof, and he's able to get a back brief. He gets his hand over from Leher, who drives out of the city. and then he gets his hand over, and then he gets a back brief, and then he moves some forces around inside the city, and then he retires for the night. But you can imagine, I wonder what would happen if Vilk had not made it in to the city that night. One of those what ifs, right? All right. So this is a good time to talk about the special forces that were involved in this particular fight. And Woody, this is my first meme, Woody. This is my first.
Yeah, I see myself there. Yeah, I'm processing the fact I'm seeing myself there. Yeah, thank you.
So, Woody, I was going through your social media looking for a headshot of you, not in like a creepy stalker kind of way, but like in a funny type of way, because I had a humorous thought that maybe this would inject some humor into the presentation. And I can't help but notice, Woody, that you and Henry Cavill have a striking resemblance to very, I have to say, which is why I was very comfortable.
He's always pointing it out, to be fair.
That's not a surprise, really. Just when I put your head on his body, I'm like, my God, they look alike. So anyway, and then I thought, well, who can I put on the woman's head? And I thought, my fellow Canadian Norma Graham. Because Norma rocks, right? Norma rocks.
Norma rocks everything. Yeah.
Brilliant. And she's pretty feisty. Like, she could probably give that young lady a run for her money, right? So I'm like, Norma's got to go on there as well. So all humor aside, so there is a special forces mission, and special forces have a role in urban operations too. You don't want to use them as regular line infantry, because sometimes they are used as regular line infantry because they're so well trained. You saw that the Battle of Mosul and the Battle of Marwi, where special forces units had so much time fighting that they actually, were burned out. But in this particular case, 21 U.S. Army Rangers are working for the Office of Strategic Services, and they've got a very clandestine mission to go in and destroy a communication center, a signal center, and an alarm unit, which what I would call a quick reaction force, a QRF in today's nomenclature. So the resources differ as to what date, but given how special forces work, they usually work right before or during the beginning of a mission. So one of the resources says it's the 12th of October, which wouldn't surprise me at all, because you want to do these kinds of missions early in the fight, because you want to cripple the enemy, immediately, right? So by crippling a German communication center and destroying their quick reaction force, you weaken the Germans considerably. So these 21 Army Rangers, get this, Woody, get this. They all speak fluent German. They're all dressed in German uniforms, wearing German helmets and with German weapons, and they even have photos of their German families in their uniform pockets. They're going to infiltrate inside to the city, and they're going to destroy the signal center and this alarm unit. They're on their way into the city when they bump into a German officer. Who are you? And Lieutenant Callahan says, well, I'm Lieutenant Schmidt. I'm with the 1st company, the 1st Battalion. We're coming back from a fighting patrol. And the German officer immediately takes them into possession and says, you got to help these civilians clear the rubble outside of this air raid shelter. So Callahan / Schmidt do that. Then they carry on with their mission. They destroy the communication center. And then they actually find out where the quick reaction force is, the alarm unit. They fire out some very lights, some flares. The QRF, the Germans come stumbling out. The sleepy-eyed Germans come stumbling out, putting their tunics and slinging their rifles. And then the Rangers ambush these German soldiers and destroy the alarm height, and then they exfiltrate out of the city. So just an example of special forces use inside an urban operation, it certainly can be done if they're going against high value targets, HVTs. But the key point about this slide, Woody, is that Norma rocks. You just got that's the
absolutely. Yeah, that's the bottom line. Yeah,
that's right. All right. So 13th of October. I don't know if you remember from the Falkland Islands War there, Woody, when the British Broadcasting Corporation broadcasted the day before 2nd Battalion, Parachute Regiment 2 Para attacked Goose Green. And the BBC announced that on the radio, and the British military wasn't very happy. Well, the precedent was set in Aachen. They announced that the 3rd Battalion is in the factory district fighting. And Colonel Corley is pretty upset because he feels this is like an operational security breach. In all honesty, the Germans know they're there because they've been fighting them the day before. So the Germans know they're there. But Corley's still pretty upset that the BBC's broadcasted his location, and he thinks that there's been an operational security breach, an OPSEC brief. So he asks if he can have somebody from the 18th Infantry Regiment kind of protect his backside. So he goes to Colonel Seitz, and Colonel Seitz goes to General Huebner, and they're going to cobble together a unit just to protect Corley's backside, just to make sure that nobody can sneak in from behind. Here's that fires plan for the 13th. So from 09:07 hours to 09:30 hours, more close air support with 11.5 tons of bombs. But here's Daniel's plan to break in and gain lodgement over into the city with the embankment. E&F Company are going to are going to crawl right up to the embankment, and they're going to throw 1,000 hand grenades over the embankment in case there's any dismounted German positions on the northwest side of that embankment. And then mortars and light artillery 100 meters falling west of the embankment, and then medium artillery 300 meters west, heavy artillery 500 meters west, close air support 500 meters plus west. And then once the troops get over the embankment, all that's going to shift back east to 200 meters west of the embankment. Like, what a phenomenal close air support and indirect fires plan for 2nd Battalion. And so that's what exactly happens. E and F companies go up and over. They start advancing. They discover a lot of civilians that are completely shell-shocked from all the close air support and artillery. And they get about a half hour into the advance when suddenly they start taking fire from behind, because the Germans have infiltrated behind the Americans using subterranean or sub-T sewer systems. And so now the battalion has to turn around and fight back. And as they approach the maintenance hole covers, they have to, shoot at them with small arms, throw grenades down them, and then find heavy objects to put over them. But right now, Colonel Daniels, who's pretty upset, is like, right, from now on, we got to make sure we clear. We're not going to go into the subterranean systems because they're too extensive, and I can't use that many resources. So, but we've got to check basements whenever we're going through buildings, just to make sure they don't have access to these subterranean systems. G Company's still on the American side of the embankment. And as they're sitting there, they realize that just down from that railway tunnel, there's a train station that's built into the embankment. And so they go back to Colonel Corley. Biso Walker goes back to Colonel Daniel, I should say, and says, there's a train station just down there, and I think the tanks can get through it. So the engineers are tasked to go down and see if they can remove the doors to the train station to see if the tanks can drive through the train station instead of going over the embankment, drive through the train station and get to the other side of the embankment. The engineers give them the thumbs up, saying that they can do that. So this way they won't have to clear out the tunnel. And that's how the tanks and the tank destroyers are going to be able to get into the city fight. F Company, Roland Weeks, his advance goes fairly well at first. They grab about 6 German prisoners of war who are completely stunned from the close air support and artillery strike. But then they come out of a small orchard, and the 1st platoon starts taking fire. So they've got to at the hole on Zollerenplatz. And so the 2nd platoon, the 1st platoon got to have to quickly defeat that German defensive position. E Company is with Ozell Smootz moving forward pretty good. Good combined arms urban tactics here. The engineers and the infantry are forward. Whenever they spot a German defensive position, they call in artillery on it. Then they run back, show the tanks where that position is. The tanks and the tank destroyers come up, destroy that German defensive position, and then they carry on with the fight. So good symbiotic relationship of protection between the infantry, the engineers, the artillery, and the armor. Outstanding stuff. And meanwhile, I'm going to talk about 3rd Battalion here because even though they're chaplains with 3rd Battalion, remember he's trying to make his way down to the 2nd Battalion. So he comes upon 3 pillboxes on 3 different streets. So Chaplain just turns to his 3 platoon commanders and he says, go destroy those pillboxes. So 1 platoon commander uses artillery on the pillbox to close with and destroy it. The 2nd platoon commander gets the tanks to make mouse holes through walls, and they approach the pillbox by going through the buildings. And then the 3rd platoon commander just starts using the backyards to flank those pillboxes. And so they destroy or capture those 3 pillboxes. Brilliant, good use of mission command, good use of initiative. Tell your subordinate commanders what you want done, and they'll figure out how to do it, which is good in urban operations, right? Well, it's good at any environment, really. But then they come across some hardened apartment buildings, and the stone masonry in these buildings is very, very challenging. And the tanks and the tank destroyers are firing at these buildings, but they're not having any luck destroying the German defensive positions because of the construction of those particular buildings. In the afternoon of the 13th, Roland Weeks gets up to the Karhol Friedhof Cemetery, but there's a 2-story pillbox there, and it's been reinforced from 2 companies, the 7th and 8th companies of the 352nd Regiment. And as the company is working its way through the cemetery, the Germans open fire from this pillbox, and they kill 2 Americans right away, and then Weeks is killed, and then one of Weeks' platoon commanders is killed, and then they have 8 wounded, and one of the platoons becomes separated from the remainder of the company. So F Company is in a tough spot right now. G Company, the engineers report the good news. And so the tanks are able to drive through the train station, and they're able to link up with G Company, who is now up and over the embankment, and they're starting to work their way up towards E Company now. And then L Company, who's having such a problem at those hardened apartment buildings, suffer the same challenges that E and F Company faced earlier, and that the Germans start popping up behind them using sewer systems, the subterranean systems. And so Chaplin now has to do what Weeks and Smoot were doing: go back, approach them with small arms, throw grenades down them, and then cover them with heavy objects to make sure the Germans can't use them. All right, so let's go up to 3rd Battalion. I Company's in the lead now because they're up at that railway station. They're meeting some stiff resistance as they go down the Grünerweg, but they get some help from German artillery. Remember, there's a German artillery party on the Louisburg Heights, and they start dropping artillery down, but they drop the rounds fall short, and they actually start landing on the German defensive positions. Thank you very kindly. So I Company is able to push forward, but when they get to the Lombardenstrasse, Botz realizes he has to turn his company southeast and and he leaves a platoon to stay up by the Grünerweg and work its way down to Farg Park. And the reason why he has to turn southeast is because K Company, Lucien Corwell's troops, they've run into an anti-aircraft gun that's firing away. Corwell's troops immediately get into the buildings, but that anti-aircraft gun is able to suppress K Company. It's on the gun is on the corner of Josef von Gotha Strasse there, and I apologize for my German. And there's a Panzerfaust crew is able to come up, and they're actually able to destroy one of the M4 Sherman tanks and cripple the other M4 Sherman, and the crew abandons the second M4 Sherman. So Sergeant Alvin Wise rushes forward, and he jumps on top of this neutralized tank, and he starts using the 50 caliber heavy machine gun on top of it to lay fire down on the German defensive positions. And his 2 privates, Brown and Gafford, run up, and they start emptying the tank of like radio equipment, because you don't want radio equipment to fall in the German hands, and all the equipment in the back of the tank. And then by some miracle of God, they're actually able to get the tank up and running, and because they don't want the Germans to take possession of the tank. And so they get the tank up and running, and as Wise is now using his personal weapon, more than likely a Thompson submachine gun, to cover fire, they're able to withdraw the tank from that particular fight. All right. By the afternoon at 1200 hours, both battalions stop to pause because they've gone through a lot of ammunition, and there's been a lot of German prisoners of war, PWs. So they got to process those. The measles sheets come in handy. 1st Infantry Division says, where are your guys? Where are your troops? So Corley's able to tell them using the measles sheets. And now artillery and close air support start falling on the Louisburg Heights, which is really good because as I Company and K Company move southwest and south, they find that they're meeting less resistance because now they're at close air support and the artillery is striking those German defensive positions, making it a bit easier for them. So by 1900 hours, Corley's formed now a hasty defensive. He's got Walter Necky's mortars behind the companies to support them, and he's got his Necky's machine guns on the flanks to provide flank protection. Well, Wilk is at the Hotel Quellenhof, and you can see 3rd Battalion off to the east there. Wilk's initiative is he tells his commanders that American tanks have completely surrounded the hotel. And in this panicky message, he intimates that he is going to, probably, if we need to withdraw from the city immediately. So right away, this goes all the way up to Model, Field Marshal Model, who makes 2 decisions. First of all, the First SS Panzer Corps, it has to attack the American units northeast of the city more vigorously. And the SS Panzer Corps commander and the division commanders are like, all right, we'll be good to go on the 15th of October. And Model is like, no, you will attack tomorrow. You will attack tomorrow. A core attack involving several divisions, and you're going to do it in less than 12 hours. Like, whoa, guy. Like, that's unheard of. And not only that, but Model gives direction for the 1st SS Hitler Battalion, commanded by Obersturmführer Herbert Rink, to disengage from the fighting north of the city and get into the city to reinforce Wilk. But Wilk is not the only one to use his initiative to get more support. The 1st Infantry Division Operations Officer uses his initiative, and he finds out that there's an M12 self-propelled 150 millimeter gun motor carriage that's available. And because Will Chaplin is having so many challenges with those hardened apartment buildings down in his part of the city, Corley actually contacts Chaplin over the radio, patches through the infantry of the 1st Infantry Division's operations officer, who says, would you like an M12? And, as you see, Chaplin's like, yeah, I could use an M12. They have a terrific blast. This thing fires a 95-pound shell. at 2,800 feet per second. Like, this is used for indirect fire rolls. Like, you're supposed to put this vehicle 5 miles away from the bad guys, and now we're going to use it in a direct fire roll, right? And so, of course, General Andrews, who commands the guns, who commands the artillery, is like, all right, I'll give you one. He's later convinced to cough up two, so one for each battalion. I'll give you one, but you can see there's not a lot of armor protection on this thing, right? So you've got to give it there's got to be a good symbiotic relationship of protection if you're going to use this thing in the direct fire roll, right? And so, just pop out. Sorry, pop out here. Like, this is a sizable weapon. Like, can you see the M12 there?
Yeah, got it. Yep.
Yeah, like, all right, now that's going to be using the direct fire roll. Like, that's outstanding. That is outstanding. So, good stuff. All right, good stuff. So, start of the day, it's an early day. Both battalions going to kick off each hour at 0600 hours. We'll go down to 2nd Battalion. G Company has to work its way northwest towards E Company. It takes a majority of the morning. The new F Company commander, because remember, Weeks was killed yesterday, right? So the new F Company commander is Lieutenant Chestnut Webb. And he's been given a real challenge because he's only got 2 platoons. He's got a 3rd platoon that's been separated, and he's lacking a platoon commander. So Webb realizes he's got to save his 3rd platoon, and he's got to destroy that 2-story pillbox. So he puts in a company attack using both of his platoons, using lots of rockets and using lots of rifle grenades, and using a lot of hand grenades. And the Germans are using lots of hand grenades as they're tossing them over the tombstones to advance towards the pillbox. And it takes a majority of the morning for Webb to get to silence the 2-story pillbox and then link up with his platoon. And there's still no link up with L Company from 3rd Battalion, which means Webb can't go forward, right? Daniel tells him, look, I don't want to risk, because the Germans are starting to infiltrate forces now in between L Company and F Company. And so Daniel says to Webb, I want 2 platoons on the north side of that cemetery. And the Germans actually are able to destroy one of F Company's 57 millimeter guns because they're able to winkle in between the 2 companies and try to attack. And they try to attack they do attack F Company from the north. So now Daniel's worried about losing the momentum. So he assumes some risk, and he tells E Company, I want you to keep moving forward as G Company catches up to you. Keep moving forward to the west. Now, the good thing is, remember, Woody, the 33rd Artillery Battalion south of the city, and it's slightly west of where the frontline units are inside the city. So this is fantastic, because what happens is that the guns are moving west. Now they're able to provide fire missions into the city, but unlike the Germans up on Lewisburg, they don't have to worry about the rounds falling short. Because remember, that happened with I Company, right? Where the rounds fell short and they helped out I Company. But because the artillery battery is slightly southwest of the frontline units, they can fire into the city without, and if the rounds fall short or go long, they're not going to strike the American units, because the American units are slightly to the east, right? And so so normally when you go into a fight, the artillery is behind you, and there's always this concern the rounds are going to fall short. But in this case, you don't have to worry about that, because the artillery is southwest, right? And so this is absolutely fantastic artillery support that, and while it may not destroy the buildings, it certainly keeps the Germans' heads down. That allows the Americans to approach the buildings and then use the tanks and the engineers and hand grenades, et cetera, to destroy those positions. So fantastic. The 14th, I Company is supposed to work its way to Farwick Park, but K Company comes upon the St. Elizabeth Church, and it's made of that really thick stone masonry. And Lucien Corbeau is having a lot of challenges. So Corley realizes he's going to have to put a battalion attack in there. And so he diverts Seth Botts, and he tells him to start going southeast so that Seth and Lucien can do an attack against St. Elizabeth Church. L Company, that self-propelled 155 is hammering away to hardened apartment buildings, but that means until they do enough destruction and neutralize those positions, they still can't move south to link up with the 2nd Battalion. And somewhat daringly here, I Company's weapon squad and M Company's mortar platoons, they infiltrate past Farwick Park and they move up onto the Lewisburg Heights. I don't know how they did this or where they did this, because there's German defensive positions on that thing. But they're able to sneak up there. And the reason why they want to get up onto that high ground is because then once Corley puts an attack in at Farwick Park to take the Hotel Quellenhof, maybe they can provide supporting fires from that particular position. So they sneak up there to do that. So remember, Obersturmführer Herbert Rink has been directed to get into the city. He breaks his convoy into 2, and he's able to slip through the gap. and he has his tanks go in first, and then he has the remainder of his 150. So now it's a battalion, but it's really a company plus because he's only got about 150 soldiers left. And the 150 soldiers on a number of half tracks are able to winkle through and get into the city and get to the Hotel Kolanov. And these attacks by 1st SS Panzer Corps now are considerably worrying to the Americans, because they're still concerned the Germans are going to be able to break through and into the backside of Colonel John Corley in particular. And so the division commander, Clarence Hubner, and the regiment commander, John Seitz, they tell Colonel Corley and Colonel Daniel, they're like, make sure you look over your right shoulder every once in a while to make sure the Germans aren't sneaking up behind you. So Daniel goes forward to visit his companies to make sure they're good to go and that they're all linked in together. And then Corley goes and visits Chaplin and gives him a probably less than diplomatic nudge to link up with 2nd Battalion, because he doesn't want that gap. He doesn't want the Germans exploiting the gap from behind now. All right. So this evening on the 14th, now Colonel Blood, now he's the Colonel. Dr. Blood mentioned in his video that that building with the blue turquoise building wasn't built to 2006. So that's why I've got a red X through it there, Woody. So that building doesn't exist. So Rink links up with Vilk at the Hotel Kolanov. Vilk is convinced that Rink is there to execute him if Vilk surrenders the city. And Rink is not happy that he, as with the Waffen SS, has to work for a regular Wehrmacht colonel. And in fact, Rink even tells Vilk, I take my orders directly from the Reichsführer, SS Heinrich Himmler. So I'll do whatever I have to do here, but you don't command me. And so Vilk is like, excuse me, I outrank you. And tomorrow you will attack the Americans. So this is not a very good start to the relationship. Rink's subordinates find a cache of rations inside the Hotel Kolanov and physically assault the German soldiers who are guarding it because they're starving. And so they steal all the rations. A 3rd Battalion fighting patrol hits the building while Vilk and Rink are arguing with each other. And so Vilk and Rink now have to deal with that fighting patrol. And it's after this point, he's like, okay, I've got to get away from Rink because I'm sure he's here to execute me. And I'm going to move my headquarters to an air raid shelter on the northwest side of Aachen, just southwest of the Louisburg Heights. And so Vilk tells the subordinates, prepare to move. We're moving tonight, and using the hours of darkness to get over to the west side of the city and move into our new headquarters. So a stormy relationship that starts between Vilk and Rink already. So on the 14th of October, there's a German parachute drop of propaganda leaflets, rations, and cigarettes. So Woody, I'm a qualified paratrooper as well, and I can tell you when you push anything out, when you push anything out of an airplane, 2 things take over: gravity and wind. So the leaflets, which that's a propaganda poster on the left, but that's symbolizing the leaflets. The leaflets drop into the German lines, and the rations and the cigarettes gratefully drop into the American lines, which the Americans are very appreciative of having rations and cigarettes. So the fickle fate of dropping supplies, as we learned at Operation Market Garden, a month before, right?
Yep.
So 15th of October, 1st SS Panzer, they've been fighting and battling the 18th Infantry Regiment, 119th Regiment. They haven't been able to punch through. What do? They turn south and they attack the 16th Infantry Regiment, which has been sitting there for several days, digging in. And so the troops are in deep trenches with overhead protection. They've got close air support and artillery support. And as the German tanks and infantry come out of the forests and start attacking the 16th Infantry Regiment, the close air support and artillery is able to separate the infantry from the armor, and the tanks actually get up onto the American positions, but they can't go any further because they don't have infantry support to them. So why they attacked a well-rested infantry regiment? Well, they were trying to probe and try to find a weakness, right? And they weren't having any luck with the 119th and the 18th Infantry Regiment, so they tried against the 16th. But once again, the Americans are still like, holy cow, they're still trying to break through in the Northeast. Start of the day, it's very cold and heavy rain with thick crowds above the city. 3rd Battalion, we'll start off 3rd Battalion today. So K Company, Dr. Blood, once again, one of his fantastic videos. He shows the Hotel Kolanov, and beside it, there's the Kerr House, which is a spa house, a very large spa house. Remember all the spas and the mineral springs up in the north end of the city? So K Company is able to attack the Kerr House, gain lodgment, break in, and start clearing up the Kerr House throughout the morning of the 15th. But there's still challenges with the Hotel Quellenhof because the M4 Shermans and the M10 tank destroyers are firing rounds at it because it's such a large building. The rounds are getting absorbed into the building, or the walls are thick enough that it's not doing so very well. So Corley's like, okay, I'm going to call up my self-propelled 155. I'm going to pull that back from Will Chaplin, and I'm going to bring that up to the Hotel Quellenhof, and I'm going to start firing at the Hotel Quellenhof there. And meanwhile, he's going to send Seth Botts up to the Krefelderstrasse to start clearing buildings up there in order to ready himself for a future attack on the Hotel Quellenhof itself. Unfortunately, remember, Wilk has told Rink to attack the Americans the next day. And so Rink doesn't give Corley the chance to use that M12 gun motor carriage. He launches his three-phase counterattack being at 1550 hours. He remember, the Germans know a little stuff about urban warfare too. They drop dozens of mortar rounds on I Company and K Company. And then Rink launches his infantry and his tanks up towards I Company, and he drives a wedge in between I and K Company. In fact, one of the tanks gets to within about 200 meters of Corley's battalion headquarters. But Seth Botts is fighting for about an hour before he has to withdraw his company because he's just getting too overwhelmed. And K Company is going to get punched out of the Kerr house because they're starting to weaken from that attack. And then phase two, Rink turns his troops and he attacks that I Company squad and M Company's mortar platoon, and they fight for about an hour and try to regain their position. But after an hour, they have to withdraw. And then phase three, he attacks the Kerr house, and he knocks Lucien Corwell's K Company out of the Kerr house. And the chaos of battle, Corwell withdraws to the north to the Rolandplatz. And it's at that point, Corley, a good defense is a good offense. Corley's reaction is to launch a spoiling attack. Look how messy this urban battlefield has become. So I Company drops 500 mortar rounds in front of its position, and with the M10s, they beat off that German attack. But what do? They turn around and they attack Lucien Corwell, who's behind them, right? And K Company's mortar fire controller, he's actually in a deep trench, and he's whispering into his radio to call the artillery fire down on his own position so that he can scatter the Germans. And then L Company, Chaplin has to throw a first platoon at the Kerr house, but there's no way only one platoon is going to be able to take that structure. Because remember, Chaplin's still worried. He's got two other platoons down at the Hardin apartment buildings. It's not like he can withdraw from that and just come up north, right? So he can only send a platoon up. And there's no way a platoon is going to take the Kerr house. That building's way too big to do that. At this point, Rink's pretty happy. He's like, okay, I've set the Americans back on their heels a bit, and I'll be able to do a little more tomorrow. Okay, 2nd Battalion. Chaplin finally links up with 2nd Battalion at the north side of the cemetery, which is great. The advance doesn't begin until the afternoon because Daniel's still sorting out his companies. Remember, he's worried about an attack from behind, and they finally begin the advance in the afternoon. F Company's doing pretty well. They come up on a bunker, and before they even fire a shot, the Germans surrender, which is great. G Company, though, Bisa Walker, they come across an air raid shelter. These air raid shelters are fairly sizable, like they're 3 stories, some are 2-3 stories high, made of very thick concrete. And there's clearly German soldiers inside of it. And so Walker approaches with an interpreter and says, surrender now, or else I'm going to use a flamethrower to light this building up. Now, I don't know how you light a concrete building up with a flamethrower, but nobody wants to die from flame. I can tell you that. The Germans are trying to negotiate how to surrender, and Walker's like, get out here now, or else I'm setting the building on fire. And he brings up the flamethrower. They squirt some flame at the door, and that does it. The door flings open. 75 German soldiers and police officers spill out, and like hundreds of civilians who completely look like they smell, and they're emaciated and they're dehydrated. They've clearly been there for more than a few days. They pour out of the air raid shelter, and now they have to process the civilians and the German prisoners of war. Walker's able to continue on, though, and he runs into a counterattack. It's timed with Rink's attack up against the 3rd Battalion. It's a combined infantry armor attack that slams into to G Company, but very good. They bring in the artillery they bring in the American artillery falls down, and then the tanks move up to try to beat off that counterattack, which is good stuff. Okay, Woody, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here. So every day I post an urban warfare historical photo of the day, and I posted this photo one day, and my good friend Mark Pyrus, he's an independent open source intelligence analyst and an image analyst. He's he's big on intelligence about goings on in Iran, but he calls my urban warfare historical photo of the day his crossword puzzles, because he looks at the photo and then he goes on to Google Earth and then he tries to find out where that photo is now using satellite shots and modern day photos. So he was able to deduce that this is actually soldiers from the 2nd Battalion in the Pasterplatz. There in the 2nd Battalion's area of responsibility. And he did it for this photo too. This is the Pasterplatz as well. And not only that, but he likes to add historical information to my photos. And then he actually finds, look at this, he actually found out the actual modern day photo of it, right? Like, just fantastic work. And that's a boon to historians. Like, as a historian, that's just fantastic stuff, because that's just more resources, right? That can prove who was where and doing what. So fantastic stuff. All right, so into the evening, 16th Infantry Regiment still getting attacked by the Greyhounds. And once again, the Americans realize, okay, look, we've got to put more forces into the urban fight to protect the backsides of John Corley and Daryl Daniels, and because they're starting to get into the heart of the city now. So Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Bill Hogan, Task Force Hogan, he's going to have his 2 battalions join into the fight, and 2nd Battalion from the 110th Regiment is going to join the fight. Bill Hogan, Task Force Hogan, is going to join the 3rd Battalion, and the 2nd of the 110th is going to join the 2nd Battalion. Not only that, but because they're so worried about the fighting outside the city, Corley and Daniel are told to take an operational pause on this day so that they can start planning and integrating, because you don't want to bring these units and just go right into the fight, right? You need to take an operational pause and start the planning process, because if you're going to integrate units into any battle, it doesn't matter if it's just an urban battle, but any battle, then you've got to be able to, plan properly and integrate them so that they understand the whole plan, right? So this operational pause will work for Corley. He's on hasty defense anyway, because Rink continues his probing attacks with his artillery and mortar support. And unfortunately, these 80mm mortars actually kill Will Chaplin. He's out. He's trying to coordinate his defense, and he's running around like a madman. Unfortunately, the mortar rounds fall in and around his position, and Will Chaplin's killed in action. But this is the only thing that Colonel Corley can do today. Daryl Daniel decides to disobey orders, and he's like, I get the operational pause, but I've got a certain momentum here that I don't want to lose. A battalion from the 1106th Engineer Regiment's been inserted. It's now co-located, providing south flank protection. And now they've got the SOP down with the artillery and the M10 and M4 support. They actually have to face a German counterattack. But because the artillery falls down first, the engineers and infantry identify the positions. They go back, they tell the tankers where those positions are. The tanks then come up, they fire. They bring up the M12 when it's needed as well. Like, good stuff. And then F Company, though, they have a tough advance towards the Kaiserplatz. They do lose one of the tanks and one of their 57mm artillery guns based on the German defense, and so they have to fight off that tough advance as they work their way through. But E and G companies do come across a pillbox near the State Theater, and I tell you, Woody, this is a almost textbook example of the symbiotic relationship of protection. If you read that, you might have to bring up your full screen there for your viewers. You might have to bring up the full screen in order to read that. Infantry, armor, artillery, engineers working all together, symbiotic relation protection. Eventually, they're going to bring up this M12. It's going to take the place of the tank that's created the hole. And what happens is that M12 starts firing rounds down at the pillbox. The pillbox was actually a tank. It was actually a German tank that had been dug in. And so that M12 destroys that tank and then turns and sees another tank that's nosing its cannon around a corner. And that M12 destroys a second tank that's on that particular street. So fantastic. Just absolutely fantastic. Have you read that, Woody? Good to go?
Yep, good to go. Yep.
Thanks. Going to go off my good friend Mark Pyrus again. Mark was able to discern that this 30 caliber machine gun crew were on that located on the Adalbert Steinweg there. Fantastic work from Mark being able to find that out. And then this photo as well, he was able to discern that this is G Company from the 2nd Battalion working its way down. He was able to find, look at that, he was able to find this building right here on the satellite photo. So that's how he's able to discern that that's the position. Again, that's wonderful for historians like myself and Dr. Blood and, other guys who need to verify this kind of information. So it's fantastic work on Mark's part. Look at this, Woody. Finally on the 16th of October, the Americans are able to link up outside the city. Sergeant Frank Carwell, who was actually mortally wounded by a German machine gun as his squad makes its way. He's from F Company, 2nd Battalion, 119th Infantry Regiment of the Old Hickories. His squad is actually able to make its way to K Company, 3rd Battalion of the 18th Infantry Regiment. Carwell's killed en route, but his two privates, Edward Krause and Evan Whitus, are able to link up with the 18th Infantry Regiment. Now, two privates does not a strong link-up make, and so the 119th and the 18th Infantry Regiments have to spend the next day reinforcing that line, that blue arrow, to make sure that the Germans can't punch through that gap again. Wilkes down to about 1,200 soldiers, and he sent a message that he can now withdraw through Sowers. Just give me the chance, and I can withdraw my troops through Sowers, the village of Sowers, just north of the city there. And so, of course, his higher commanders are like, it's very clear Wilkes trying to withdraw from the city. We need to reinforce the 1st SS Panzer Corps' attacks outside of the city because he needs to stay in place to defend the city. But everybody's positive that Wilkes ready to surrender. There's no fighting on this day. Remember, we've got to integrate. The Americans have to integrate those other units right into the planning process, right? And so what's going to happen today is Colonel Corley, he's going to have two back briefs. One's at 1000 hours, and Major General Maurice Rose, who is the 3rd Armored Division Commander and ultimately the Division Commander for Task Force Hogan, he's very interested in knowing what Bill Hogan's going to do inside the city. So he actually gets back briefed at 1000 hours by Colonel Corley on what the plan is. I'm going to talk about the plan in a sec. And then Corley has to back brief General Hubner at 1500 hours, and Colonel John Seitz is, of course, at both of those back briefs. And Colonel Daniel is worried because he's moving northwest, and he's worried. You see, Woody, how the railway turns south and then comes across in a loop here?
Yep.
Daniel's worried that that's going to widen the gap, and he's going to need another unit. So Daniel goes to Seitz, who goes to Hubner, who goes to Lightning Joe Collins, and they, with a request that we need another unit. And Lightning Joe is like, we're having enough problems with the Germans northeast of the city that I can't give you anything more. So find it within the 1st Infantry Division. And then Hubner turns to Seitz and goes, find it within the 26th Infantry Regiment. So Seitz turns to his 1st Battalion Commander and says, give me a company to give to Daryl Daniel. So the 1st Battalion Commander gives him C Company, and that's going to work its way towards Daryl Daniel to provide flank protection. All right, so here's Colonel Corley's plan for the 3rd Battalion. Phase 1, lots of mortar and artillery fire on the German positions in Farwick Park. Task Force Hogan's going to be set up north of the city. Phase 2 of the plan, I Company and K Company are going to move southwest and clear all that urban area. I Company is going to move down, and its objective is the T intersection here at the Monheim's Allée. And then K Company's got the task of taking the hotel and clearing some houses around the hotel. And then the new L Company commander, because Will Chaplin was killed the day before, Vince Shepard, Lieutenant Vincent Shepard. Shepard's got to take the Kerr House. Once that's the start of phase 2. So the end of phase 2 looks like this. This is what Corley's back briefing to General Rose and General Hubner and Colonel Seitz. The end of phase 2 looks like this. There's going to be the 26th Infantry Regiment's Anti-Armor Company is going to provide north flank protection. That's that symbol there. And then finally, phase 3 is Task Force Hogan going up to the north side of the Louisbourg Heights and attacking the Louisbourg Heights from the north. And then Colonel Hogan, he's given one task that's canceled, but then he's told go to the Rahi Chateau, which is just northwest of the Louisbourg Heights. And so that's going to be phase 3 of Colonel Corley's plan. So on this evening, Rink has decided that the Hotel Qualinoff is no longer worth it, right? Remember, he doesn't have a battalion. He's got a company plus, about 150 soldiers. And so he decides he's going to withdraw from the hotel. So what he does is, in groups of 4, with him in the first group of 4, at nighttime, they run across this very wide boulevard. And a second group of 4 gets across, and a third group of 4 gets across. Well, he's still got a few troops left. When another group of 4 gets across, the Americans are onto them, and machine gun fire plunges down this roadway and knocks down one of the German soldiers. So now the Germans realize that the soldiers that are in the Hotel Qualinoff are there to stay. They can't withdraw anymore, and they don't know where the Americans are on the north side. So Rink doesn't have all of his troops, but he's able to withdraw a majority of his subordinates from the hotel. Okay, it's a good time now to talk about Aachen civilians. So by the 17th of October, the Americans have taken over the possession of the German military barracks in Brand, which is about 6 kilometers southeast of Aachen. And, you know, like I mentioned earlier, Woody, about 10% of an urban population will stay inside the city because they have nowhere to go. And because we're the good guys, it behooves us to take care of them, to give them shelter, food, water, medical supplies, etc. And the Americans, this is the template. Well, I mean, the Armed Forces of the Philippines did it really good at the Battle of Marawi in 2017, but this is the template. So because they've taken over the military barracks in Brand, they're able to find, when they find any civilians, they take them under control. They don't say, okay, just keep walking that way, because as soon as they hear the gunfire, they're just going to run to the next building anyway. So they take them under control. They get them out of the urban battle space when it's safe. They're processed to make sure, because some German soldiers will dress up as civilians, but due to the ill-fitting clothing, they usually get caught. So they're processed to make sure that they're actual civilians. Then they're brought back to Brand. They're put into 7 buildings. Committees are formed. They keep the families together. It's the 1940s, of course, Woody, so those different values, right? The women clean and cook, and the men work on the farms to gather the food. And then they're taken care of. Like, this is what the good guys do. Even though these are German civilians, the Americans realize that, you know, they have to take care of civilians, and they can't make them targets, right? And so they do all these wonderful things to make sure that these civilians survive. And then eventually, when the city is taken, they're going to let all the medical personnel and the farmers be the first to be released, so they can get back into the city and start take care of people. Right? Like, this is a template for other militaries to follow when it comes to taking care of civilians in the urban fight. This is, and the Americans will do this for the rest of the battle, which is outstanding. Outstanding. Okay, the 18th of October, still forces fighting, trying to break that gap. We got to reinforce. We got to resupply. Right. Okay. 3rd Battalion, phase 1 of the plan. 4.2-inch mortars, 81-millimeter mortars falling down on German defensive positions in and around Farwick Park. Notice that the self-propelled 155 gun is up with I Company. It fires about 12 rounds in support of Seth Botts. That allows his company and K Company to move forward along the Krefelderstrasse there. L Company is not moved yet, because what they're going to do is they're going to wait for the M12 crew to come around and put fire down into the Kurhaus and fire down into the Hotel Kolonov. I don't know if this M12 crew got silver stars or whatever, but these guys are driving all over the place, and their sustainment plan must have been phenomenal, because to be able to drive all over the city like this and put rounds down range and continually to support the battalion, like, that's a fairly, you know, big distance to drive that vehicle, right? Like, just, that's outstanding. Like, these M12 crews deserve the Medal of Honor, as far as I'm concerned, because of the support that they're given. So K Company breaks in and gain lodgement in the lobby. So they get around to the other side of the building, and they break in and gain lodgement into the hotel lobby, while Lucien Corwell is clearing other houses across the street. And Lieutenant William Rackford is the platoon commander. He goes in. Now, the Germans have been taking fire from that M12, and so their rank subordinates are in the basement of the building because they're trying to avoid getting killed from the M12 fire that's plunging into the walls of the building. And so when the Americans find this out, when they try to go down the stairs into the basement, and the Germans fire at them, right? So they find 2 other stairwells that go into the basement. They put guards on the basement. Well, Walt Necky comes into the hotel. He's trying to find machine gun positions up on the higher floors of the hotel that will allow for, you know, support by fire positions when they get past the hotel. And so Walt Necky decides to get involved in the fight. He tries to go down the stairs, and, you know, he gets shot at. So with Bill Rockford's soldiers covering the 3 stairwells, Walt Necky takes his troops, and he's able to throw some grenades down the stairwells. He's able to get down one set of stairs, and now the Germans have been enveloped on both sides from the 3 stairwells, and so they have to surrender. But if you look at the size of that building, Woody, like, now, thankfully, there's only a few of Rink's subordinates, German soldiers, inside that building. Because I look at that building, I'm like, oh my God, that would be like 2 battalions of infantry and engineers need to clear that building because of its size and nooks and crannies. So the fact that 1 platoon went in there and cleared that building out is pretty impressive. But the other thing that's impressive is that when the Americans go to the top floors of the hotel and they find these caches of rations and water, and they also find a 2-centimeter flak filtering 38 anti-aircraft weapon system that's been taken apart and brought up piece by piece and reassembled on one of the top floors of the hotel. And there's a dead German sitting in the seat. Well, the reason why that flak gun is why well, I effectively call it a quad 20 because it's 4 20-millimeter guns, right? So, when you go down to, I'm going to go down to the hotel again, like that gun is on the northeast side of the hotel, right? And as a result, like it's got a beautiful view of Farwick Park. So that's why the Germans have put that gun there. And it's probably the reason why K Company came down and used these buildings to get around into the front, because you don't want to run K Company across that ground, not with that quad 20 there. And it's got a beautiful view of Farwick Park, right? So, I mean, there's a German soldier, a dead German soldier sitting in the gunner's seat. One of the American soldiers goes up and pushes the German out of the seat, and then he sits down in the seat and he starts firing at all the remaining defensive positions within Farwick Park, probably more than gleefully, because that's a pretty hefty weapon to be firing in the direct fire role. And so now the German defensive positions all through Farwick Park here are getting hammered by this quad 20 that's being fired against them. But it also explains why the Americans went in the front door of the hotel instead of attacking from behind. All right, so by 11:30, mission accomplished. Shepard's in the Kerr house. Corwell's got the hotel, and Botts is down by the Monheim's Allée. The M12 crew moves up and starts firing at German positions at the Church of San Salvador on the Salvatorberg on the Louisburg Heights there, which is pretty impressive. 2nd Battalion. They destroyed those 2 tanks at the State Theater. There's more infantry armor, German counterattacks, but they're able to beat those off again. Daniel's not fooling around. Bring in the artillery, bring in close air support, bring up the tanks. Infantry engineers identify symbiotic relation protection. That's fantastic. G Company gets into a church. They clear the church, and then they start advancing past the church, and then they start taking fire from behind. And it takes them a couple of hours to realize that there's probably a German position up in the steeple of the church. They bring up M4 Sherman tanks and M10 tank destroyers, but the church is built of that thick stone masonry and that old brick, and it's taken all the rounds. So they bring up the M12 and they fire one shot, and that steeple gets obliterated, and they carry on with the mission. They come into another air raid shelter. They don't have to use a flamethrower on this one. The doors get flung open and civilians pour out of that air raid shelter. They come up on a convent. The Germans are actually in a convent. Same thing, artillery support backed with M4, M10 tanks and tank destroyers. And then they're able to eliminate those positions. And then finally, 2nd Battalion, 110th, is able to link up with the 2nd Battalion that evening. That evening, Wilk sends out more nervous messages. So Woody, what do you think their reaction of his commanders are going to be when they receive this message? What do you think, Woody? Woody, are you there?
Sorry, yeah. Tell me what do they react?
Okay.
I'm mesmerized.
Okay, good. So I was just asking you, what do you think Vilk's superiors are going to react when they read
counterattack? I guess, yeah.
Yeah, they're going to say, Vilk, you're going to stay in place. Look at Gerd von Rundstedt. He's like, you're going to die. You're going to die there. Like pretty much. Like this is the message he gets from Brandenburg and von Rundstedt. That's a friendly reminder that Hitler has said that this is a Festung city, and you're gonna defend it to the last. All right. So remember, we still have to kick off. Task Force Hogan's arrived. It's now we got to kick off Colonel Corley's phase 3 of this particular part of the attack. German defenses on the Salvatorberg. There's a small area shelter, some pillboxes, and there's some human-made caves with machine gun emplacements. All right. So I Company is down in a support by fire position. L Company is going to be attacking the Salvatorberg. And what's going to happen is I Company support by fire. L Company is literally going to crawl. These soldiers are going to literally crawl on their hands and knees up the Louisburg Heights, up the Salvatorberg, while they have artillery rounds landing in front of them. They've got mortar rounds landing in front of them. The M10s and the M4s and the M12 are firing above their heads. Like all this violence is just literally just, a few meters over their heads. And that allows the crawling soldiers from L Company to to move forward. And once they get within machine gun distance, they can set up their machine guns to fire their riflemen and their engineers even closer to the position, where now they can throw their grenades and satchel charges into the air raid shelter and into the tunnels. M Company's mortars fired so many mortar bombs that the tubes turned bluish red. They were that hot, which is why I've got M Company's mortars colorized there. Like, wow. That's wow, and that's dangerous. But that's how many rounds they fired. Meanwhile, Task Force Hogan is moving up to the north side of the Louisbourg Heights, and we're going to pop out once again and start going back to our 3D map. I'm going to pop up and use the ground elevation again, just to add some to it. Good to go. So that'll populate in a moment. Okay, so Task Force Hogan is on the Sorcerer rig, and I apologize, the Sorcerer rig right here, but they're taking fire as they move up. Why is that? Because remember, there's German artillery parties up on the tower of the Louisbourg Heights. So guess what they bring? Guess what the Americans bring up? They bring up the M12 to fire at the tower, right? Which is fantastic, and that allows Colonel Hogan to keep advancing. He turns left at this four-way intersection right here, and he starts making his way down the Provider Weg. And then when he gets to this Y intersection, that's right here. When he gets to this Y intersection, he drops off two companies, E Company and F Company, and they're going to come across this open ground, and they're going to attack the Louisbourg Heights from the north. Meanwhile, Colonel Hogan is going to take the rest of his task force, and he's going to form a line of defense. We're looking south now towards the Louisbourg Heights. He's going to form a line of defense all the way to these railway tracks, and this will protect his two companies from being reinforced or from being attacked from the west here. Now, eventually, he needs to get to the Rahi Chateau, which is this building right here. It's going to pop up. Once he gets to the Rahi Chateau, this building right here, he's going to find the caches of 150 millimeter artillery ammunition. He's going to find dozens and dozens of liquor bottles. So Colonel Hogan jokingly says that, instead of fighting to the last man, they fought to the last bottle. But anyway, so he positions his task force north of the Louisbourg Heights right here to look down south to prevent the reinforcements, while E and F companies move up and attack the Louisbourg Heights from the north. The problem is that E and F companies have some real challenges with the heights. And so the F Company commander says to one of his platoon commanders, Lieutenant Norman Strait, he sends him off to the west, to the right here, and he's got to infiltrate up to the north side. He's got to fight his way through a pillbox first. And then what the F Company commander wants to do is he wants Norman Strait to get his platoon up to Louisbourg Heights and then come in and attack the German positions from the top of the hill. So this envelopment from behind. But by the time that Norman Strait is able to get his platoon up, it's getting close to dark. And so they have to pretty much stop right there. Just going to come back out now a bit. Touch off the ground elevation. Good. And back to the fight. Mm-hmm. So that's why you see F Company having to send their platoon up. But that's where that battle pretty much ends. 19th of October, a really good day today for 2nd Battalion. Lots of good combined arms, urban operations, urban tactics, techniques, procedures as they advance. They find that the buildings, the basements, the walls and the basement walls are very thin, so they can make mouse holes. And they find that the tanks can easily destroy the fences through backyards. So instead of advancing down the streets, they're going to advance through backyards, and they're going to make mouse holes through the buildings. And they make such great progress this day. They're actually able to take the Aachener Dome, Charlemagne's Cathedral, by the evening. And I have to say, as we zoom back out, some of my fellow urbanistas out there will be very impressed, as we all should be, that there's the Aachener Dome right there, Woody. You can see this is where they started, this street right here, and they were able to clear all of this dense urban terrain in one day. That's really, really quite impressive in order to get to the Aachener Dome that evening. Like, very, very good. Well done, Americans. So the soap opera between Vilk and Rink continues. Vilk sends this message out to his subordinates, and you can see what I've underlined and bolded there. That's a subtle reference to Rink, because Rink has come to Vilk and he's like, I'm not going to be taken prisoner of war and be a prisoner of war for the rest of the conflict. So I'm planning my escape. And Vilk is more than happy about that, really, because again, he thinks Rink is there to kill him and to execute him if he surrenders the city. So he's like, fine, get out of the city. And then he sends out this subtle message to his subordinates. Rink's plan of escape is he's going to take all the weapons off the half tracks, and then he's going to load up his half tracks. He's got 7, 8 half tracks, and he's going to load up all the half tracks. The first convoy is going to be full of his wounded. They're going to put red cross signals on red cross signs on the outside of the half tracks. He's going to send his first convoy out in the middle of the night, and then the second convoy will follow once he verifies that the first convoy is able to make it out. So what's eventually going to happen is that first convoy does leave the city in the middle of the night. They're taken fire by the Americans en route, but they're actually able to break out of the city. But they drive right into American lines, and an American tanker was actually going to shoot the first half track. But once he sees the red cross sign on the outside, the tanker drives up, links up with the convoy, and he says, "Come with me. I'll take you right to the prisoner of war cage." So Rink is like bugging Rink, or Rink is bugging Vilk. He's like, "Have you heard? Have you heard if my guys made it to? Have they made it out? Have they made it out?" And then Vilk eventually verifies that we haven't got any messages that your guys are out, so they've probably been taken prisoner. But that's Rink's plan of escape. 3rd Battalion, this is where they are. Now, at the start of the day, F and E companies, they go to attack the Louisbourg Heights, and the Germans have actually left the Louisbourg Heights. They withdrew in the middle of the night and left, infiltrated out in the middle of the night. So F and E companies don't have any fight on the Louisbourg Heights at all, or very little fighting because, there's hardly anybody there. And then so what happens is Colonel Corley starts advancing his 3 companies extended line. But all 3 company commanders get wounded to this day. And Corley's pretty angry about that he's lost all 3 company commanders being wounded. So Corley says, "I don't care how big it could be a German with a rifle. I don't care. The M12 will shoot at it." Once again, the M12 crew is just driving all over the place, shooting at all these defensive positions, because Corley's pretty angry that he's lost his 3 company commanders. It doesn't matter how big the position is; it's going to take fire from that M12. And with the combination of Task Force Hogan going up the Rahi Chateau and 3rd Battalion's movements this day, 545 German prisoners of war, and they find hundreds of civilians. 2nd Battalion, they're pretty much an extended line in the center of the city. They start moving. F Company's got a task to move up to the Technical University, but when it gets there, there's a building, again, made of that really stout masonry. And so they're finding it a tough job. Even they bring up the M12 and it's firing at this building. It's just putting rounds into the building. There's a German mortar crew behind the building. And then they have machine guns, riflemen, Panzerfausts inside the building, and anti-tank guns. And then so E Company, Ozell Smoot, he's initially going west. And then Daniel says, right, turn northeast, because I got to put a battalion attack in against that building up at the Technical University, because that building's being too stout. And then Beso Walker is just making his way towards the railway. Okay, so opera continues. Vilk passes out dozens of Iron Crosses first class to second class to his subordinates. He sends this really odd message as if he's showing his superiors that now he's willing to fight to the death, right? And Rink says, "Okay, look, I'm getting out today. I'm taking the rest of my troops and getting out today." And Vilk is like, "See you later." Rink is even told by his subordinates, "We'll have enough ammunition to last about till 0800 hours tomorrow morning, and then we're out of ammunition." So Rink is like, "Yeah, I got to get out." And then Wilk actually says to his subordinates, "In small parties, try to infiltrate out of the city if you don't want to become a prisoner of war." And ironically, Rink is actually able to get out of the city with his subordinates, and he lives to fight another day. How he does it, I don't know. But anyway, 21st, final day of battle there, Woody, final day of urban fighting.
Yep.
That M12 continues to fire at the university all morning. The defenders are actually able to pin 2 of F Company's platoons into their buildings. But an F Company squad does get into the building and it starts clearing the rooms. And as soon as the Germans hear that, they send out an officer to link up with E Company, because E Company is providing support by fire positions. And E Company, one of the platoon commanders and the German officer approach the technical building, the Technical University building, and the doors flung open. And out of the doors and windows come like 125 German prisoners of war. So that pretty much ends 2nd Battalion's fight. They move to the other side of the railway, and then they're told by Colonel Seitz to move a little further to the west. And that ends the urban fighting for them. 21st of October, Corley is going to have I Company and K Company completely isolate the air raid shelter. That's an example of an air raid shelter. I think actually Dr. Blood had that in his video earlier on.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that's Wilkes air raid shelter, but it's something similar. And then once I and K Company isolate that objective, then he's going to bring up the M12 and just fire at it as long as it takes, all day and all night if it has to. So at that point, Vilk is like, okay, he allegedly said when Americans start using 155 as sniper weapons, it's time to give up. His course of action 1, he sends out 2 German soldiers to wave the white flag and surrender. They immediately get shot down. So there's 30 American German prisoners of war inside that air raid shelter. So Private First Class James Haswell and Sergeant Edward Paget get tasked. Paget actually volunteers, and they go out with 2 German soldiers and with a big white flag, and they start taking small arms fire. So Paget's desperately waving the flag, and then as he's making his way, the I Company soldiers recognize him, and I Company soldier says, calls him here. Mortar rounds start falling on the German soldiers. This is how quickly the Americans can work now with their enablers. Mortar rounds automatically start landing on the German soldiers when they're accompanying the Americans towards the I Company lines. And then they call off the mortars, and they're finally told, okay, we want to surrender. Our commander wants to surrender. So the platoon commander says, go back. You have 45 minutes to come out in groups of 4. Wilk, Paget, and Haswell go back. They link up with Vilk. Vilk asks to be escorted to Corley's battalion headquarters, in which he does. He gets escorted to his headquarters where they negotiate the terms of the surrender. And then later on, the 1st Division Deputy Commander, Brigadier General George Taylor, and Colonel Seitz also show up to take the surrender of Vilk, and he signs that particular declaration. So the numbers, that's the end of the urban fighting, Woody. There's the German numbers. There's the American numbers for the 2nd and 3rd Battalions inside the urban fighting, and then the total numbers, the Old Hickories and the 1st Infantry Division, the fighting outside of the city. Civilians, again, 165,000 inside the city, but about 5 to 20,000, depending on the resources, are inside the city, 3,700 down in Brand. And the ammunition expenditure, just to demonstrate that certain types of ammunition are going to be used in high quantities for urban operations, because concrete, stone, brick, and steel and wood is a lot harder to destroy than dirt. So you're going to be using a lot of types of ammunition. And then the collateral damage, I mentioned earlier about the percentage of the buildings destroyed due to the Allied air raids. But by the end of the urban fighting, 80% of the buildings are destroyed, and the whole city's just a mess. The whole city is just a mess. All right, lessons learned. So Woody, I'll try to wrap this up quickly for you. My apologies, I've gone a lot longer than I thought.
Oh no, it's brilliant, and we're in it now. That's it. Okay. We can't back out. Keep the operational tempo going, Jayson.
Oh, see. So remember, whenever I write these case studies with John Spencer and Liam Collins, we always like to draw out lessons learned. So 2 strategic, 2 operational, 2 tactical. So Aachen had no military value until Hitler said it's military valuable to me. So you could have a city that has no military value whatsoever. When our senior political and military leaders say it's valuable, it becomes valuable, right? And so lesson learned there. Civilians in the urban battlefield, and I say it's a strategic lesson because, soldiers and sailors and aviators and Marines, they die in battle, and people somewhat expect that. But when innocent civilians die in battle, that garners national and international attention. Yeah. And so this is why it's so important to have a proactive plan to safely escort civilians out of the urban battlefield. And the Americans did it here very well, because if not, then your military looks bad. It looks like you are the bad guys because you're killing civilians. 2 operational lessons. You have to isolate that urban objective, right? It would have been a completely different battle, I'll suggest, if Vilk and Rink hadn't been able to sneak into the city. But the Americans tried hard to isolate, and the Germans tried even harder to make sure that the gap stayed open. So you have to isolate that urban objective so that the defenders lose quicker. And then a need for a reserve. The Americans are recognizing that as 2nd and 3rd battalions are moving in, they needed more forces to fight the battle. So they bring in Task Force Hogan, they bring in 2nd Battalion, 110th, they bring in the engineers. And then tactical lessons, pushing those enablers right down the frontline units. I've beaten that to death. And good control measures with the measles sheets. and being able to identify where friendly forces are. That's fantastic. Conclusion. Doctored photo, top left. You see that photo all the time. It's a doctored photo. It's not the M12 firing Aachen. That's the actual photo in the bottom right.
Right.
This photo, sometimes mistaken for Aachen. It's not. It's Gemünden am Main. I apologize for pronunciation, in the 5th of April. And the American Stalingrad. This is my own personal rant, Woody. Whenever you watch Second World War documentaries, and near the end, the narrator always says, and it was the toughest battle, the bloodiest battle of the Second World War. So every battle, apparently, well, of course it was. Every battle is the bloodiest of the Second World War's battle. It's war, right? Well, as an urban warfare historian, every urban warfare battle is compared to Stalingrad. Ortona is the little Stalingrad.
Yeah.
Aachen is American Stalingrad. Manila is the Far East Stalingrad. Bakhmut is the Ukrainian Stalingrad. All right, if you want to compare the level of violence that's being done at the tactical level, I can understand that you can compare it to Stalingrad. But as an urban warfare historian, I have to look at how things done are at the operational and the strategic levels as well, right? And there's differences between Aachen and Stalingrad at the operational and strategic level. And I don't know who designed this graphic. I found this graphic. That's awful. Like, it's a colorized tank. Those look like it's a colorized tank destroyer. Those look like British soldiers. And the red arrow and the circle, is that supposed to be the tank shooting at the German civilian? Like, what a garbage piece of graphic.
Yeah, it is pretty bad.
That is awful. Whoever took that should be shot with a ball of their own shit. Excuse my unofficer-like language. That's just awful. And that just perpetuates the myths, right? Are we supposed to imply here that the British were at Aachen and that they shot civilians? That's unacceptable. So Colonel Lou DeMarco wrote a fantastic book, Concrete Hell, in which he talks about the Battle of Aachen. And at the operational level, he talks about the difference between the American approach to Aachen and the German approach to Stalingrad. So I am not so keen on calling Aachen the American Stalingrad, because the Americans had a different operational plan, and that involved isolating the city to allow them quicker victory, whereas the Germans couldn't because of the Volga River being the main obstacle, and because they weren't able to stop the Russians from reinforcing and resupplying across the Volga, right? So there's a different operational approach here that has to be taken into consideration. So even though historians love comparing, Stalingrad to every battle to Stalingrad, it's not always right. I interviewed Colonel Lou DeMarco for one of the Modern Wars 2 podcasts. I talked about his book, Concrete Hell. He's got a number of case studies in there that he wrote, and he talks about the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures of both sides: Stalingrad, Aachen, Seoul, French and Algiers, the British, Northern Ireland, Battle of Hue, First Grozny, Jenin and Nablus, the Israelis, and Jenin, Nablus, and Ramadi.
Yeah.
And I asked Colonel DeMarco during this podcast, I'm like, which case study is what case study proves that, what right looks like? And without a moment's hesitation, Colonel DeMarco's like, the Americans at Aachen did all the right things. And I was like, yeah, they have done all the right things. So, Woody, do we have time for questions, or have I spent my talking?
We'll do a few. Yeah, we'll do a few. Thank you. Absolutely amazing tour de force presentation. So let's start with Dr. Blood, Dr. Aachen's question. So Aachen or Arnhem is his simple question there. I mean, if you can keep it to a quick response.
What's the context of that question?
Well, I mean, in the sense of what should the Allies have been focusing on in September 44 as a primary objective?
It's really, it's really easy to say in retrospect, Aachen.
Yeah.
But like in September of 44, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the Allies in September 44. And, certainly Monty is saying that Arnhem is the way to go to be able to get into the Ruhr, right? And so, in September 1944, Arnhem is the answer. But in retrospect, and now that I'm talking to Dr. Aachen and answering you, and at the risk of looking extremely biased, I would say you plunge in to Germany through and around Aachen and then get up to the Ruhr that way. But that's easy really to answer when you're answering it in retrospect, I will suggest. Yeah.
No, fair enough. The other ones are just asking about they're about how does it affect the Battle of the Hurtgen? Mad Cat saying, did the Battle of Aachen force the US Army into the Hurtgen Forest? And there was another one on a similar one. Andreas asked, after taking Aachen, the next logical step would be to take Cologne. So Hurtgen and the Bulge battle stopped that, I guess. So, I mean, that after this the things change in terms of the German reaction. So what impact does Aachen have on the Hurtgen? Let's start with that one.
I don't know, because I have not studied the Hurtgen fighting at all. I'm an urban warfare historian, so
Yeah, fair enough. That's trees. Yeah, we don't do trees. Yeah, let's do trees. Someone else. Yeah.
I'm very much focused on the urban fighting, so I honestly can't answer that question.
Okay, it's a good one about this one is about what you've been talking about. So Great Dominion is saying, how are they keeping the M12's continued supply with ammunition? Was that the weasels coming up? And then we had a question earlier about, did the Germans recognize the weasels were significant in bringing up supplies? And if so, did they try and target them? So two questions. How are they keeping the M12 supplied, and were the weasels targeted by the Germans?
The resources don't discuss. Unfortunately, sustainment is something that's not discussed a lot in the resources,
right?
Unless Dr. Blood's found something, and that I haven't, because sustainment's not really sexy to talk about. You know, the trigger pullers; those are the sexy things to talk about. So I can only assume that the M29 weasels were part of that plan, right? Because they were being used by both the 2nd and the 3rd battalions. So I would suggest that the weasels were part of the plan, but with the amount of ammunition those M12s were going through, they had to have brought them up in trucks and then hand carried them over to the weasels and then brought them in. So that I make that assumption, but that sustainment plan must have been extremely good in order to keep feeding rounds up the tubes of that M12. And then whether the Germans actually knew about the weasels or not, I don't know. But I would suggest that the weasels were kept behind the front lines in order to continue the resupply. So unless the Germans had the capability of targeting the M29s with tanks or with artillery, which they could have done, it would have been very difficult, because of course it was hard enough fighting the frontline troops, in all honesty.
And we've got more, but we'll have to bring you back for a round of questions. But my last one is, how did they maintain that tempo during that, looking down at the kind of the battalion level of the infantry? I know you said they brought in the reserves, they brought in Hogan, they brought in other things. But one of James Holland's kind of remarks is that very few operations in World War II seem to go beyond about 3, 4, 5 days. They just tend to fizzle out because everybody's knackered. So, and the 1st Division, you could argue, are going into this fairly knackered already, and then they've been at it since bloody North Africa. Yes, there's reinforcements, but how are they kind of maintaining that tempo? I mean, they must be bringing up food and rations and water and stuff. Have you got a kind of a solution to that?
Yeah, I can tell you, fight during the day and rest at night. It seems to be the norm in urban warfare history, where this is physically exhausting work and mentally exhausting work. So by the end of the day, your troops are absolutely knackered. And so the secret is to bed down at night, put out some observation posts so the Germans can't infiltrate in, try and sneak and ambush you during night darkened hours, and then wake up in the morning and go at it once again. And I see this Ortona, Aachen, Seoul, the Battle of Hue. I see this Battle of Mosul, Marwi, over and over again. You just can't, because you'll just physically and mentally exhaust your troops if you fight all day and all night. So take the nighttime to rest your troops and resupply. Get your casualties out, and that's how you maintain the momentum.
Okay, and secure what you've got, and I get that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that we'll deal with that. I think there are other questions, but I think let's leave it at that. But I mean, again, absolutely amazing presentation.
Thanks.
And as it was all the good ones, it raises as many questions as it does answer them. I've got lots of things buzzing around now about lessons learned from this, and how does Aachen rate as a pivotal battle in terms of doctrine, in terms of because that you maintain this idea, the effect of the American attack and how professional it was, and yet still heavy casualties. And I think I've been in my studies of this, I was kind of affected by that casualty rate, and therefore when you see a high casualty rate, you think, well, the performance can't have been really good. But what you've been saying is that the performance levels were really high. The tempo, the coordination was really good. But in an urban environment, you are going to lose people. Even if you're doing well, you're going to lose people.
Yeah. Woody, if you don't mind shameful self-promotion, the resources I used, I take care of the 40 different divisions electronic urban operations library. Pop onto there, you can find Aachen resources there. I do write for the Urban Warfare Project with John Spencer and Leon Collins. We do have a number of case studies that we've produced on urban warfare battles. Of course, I'm a Battle of Ortona guy, so I've got lots of YouTube documentaries on that, and my thesis is online. I've given presentations to all these battles to my subordinates or to people around the world. Shameless plug. Next Thursday, I'm with Brad St. Croix talking about the Battle of Way. Next Thursday, the 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I hope you can tune into that as well. But these are other presentations I've done. And finally, I am on the Twitter or the X. And so you can find me on there. And most of 90% of my stuff is all urban warfare, urban operations, 5% military history, and 5% go Ukraine. So
brilliant. Well, we will leave things there. It's been an epic show. Thank you very much, Jayson. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. We're back with Gregory Fontenot tomorrow to kind of expand on this subject. And then we're back on Friday with Dr. Philip Blood, but not before Christopher Jarry comes on talking about the British 30 miles up the road in Geilenkirchen. And I'm really looking forward to that because he's going to be talking about his father's epic 18 Platoon book, which is a favorite of British historians. So thank you, everybody. I will see you all next time. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks,